Yeah, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to invite Father Jonathan Howe to lead us this evening in a moment of reflection. Father Jonathan.
Three things I was sharing with the parish over the weekend as cause for our attention. The war continuing to rage in Ukraine, the outbreak of war in Israel and Palestine, and the continuing inability of nations to find the collective will to effectively tackle the impact of climate change. Some prayer and reflection in the Christian tradition. A psalm, a prayer of one afflicted. Hear my prayer, O Lord, let my cry come to thee. Do not hide thy face from me in the day of my distress. Incline thine ear to me, answer me speedily in the day when I call. For my days pass away like smoke, and my bones burn like a furnace. My heart is smitten like grass and withered. I forget to eat my bread. Because of my loud groaning, my bones cleave to my flesh. I am like a vulture of the wilderness, like an owl of the waste places. I lie awake. I am like a lonely bird on the housetop. All the day, my enemies taunt me. Those who deride me use my name for a curse. For I eat ashes like bread and mingle tears with my bread, because of your indignation and anger, for you have taken me up and thrown me away. My days are like an evening shadow. I wither away like grass. A prayer for the progress of peoples. If you agree with what it says, you may like quietly to join in saying Amen at the end, just silently in your own heart. O God, who gave one origin to all peoples and willed to gather from them one family for yourself, fill all hearts, we pray, with the fire of your love and kindle in them the desire for the just advancement of their neighbor, that through the good things which you richly bestow upon all, each human person may be brought to perfection, every division may be removed, and equity and justice be established in human society. For this and all we carry in our hearts. Amen.
Thank you, Father Jonathan, and I think you're able to stay with us until 6:30, so I hope you enjoy the time. And welcome everyone to this evening's council meeting. Members, please raise your hands to indicate you wish to speak. You will be operating your own microphones. If you're unable to hear, please indicate. This meeting will be live streamed, and you will be using the electronic voting system, using the consoles in front of you. When a vote is called for, they will light up and you will be able to vote. There is for on the left, abstain in the middle, and on the right is against. If there's a recorded vote called for, we will do this in the roll call normal way. And if members are happy to agree a recommendation by general assent, we will do that in the usual way. Speeches will be timed at 4 minutes, and you will be given a 30-second warning before your time is up. Members may speak only once on each item, except in the circumstances as set out in Procedure Rule 14.6. And if someone has already made your point, please do not feel the need to repeat it. If you're making a point of order, please be very clear about which procedure, rule or law you think has been breached and how, and then wait for agreement that you may proceed. So agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. Ben, have we any?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have apologies from councillors Atkins, MacLeod and Wicks this evening.
Thank you. And agenda item number 2, the minutes. Members, Councillor Rabini.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Mayor, I think Councillor Keane apologised.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, the minutes. Members, the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on 18th of July and the extraordinary council meetings held on the 29th of August were published online and circulated with this agenda pack. There have been 2 amendments notified. In paragraph 21.3 of the minutes of 18th of July, £138 should read £138 million. And only Councillor Goodridge should be attributed with the comments at minute 42.7 of the 29th of August, not Councillor Murray as well. So subject to those changes, do you approve the minutes? Is there a seconder? Councillor
Happy
Follis.
to second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any? Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On behalf of myself and other senior officers who are employed by Waverley Borough Council and also work for Guildford Borough Council, I declare an interest in item number 12 and notify you that we will be leaving the chamber for the duration of that item. Thank you.
Yes.
Regarding the Cranley Leisure Centre, I've got to declare an interest. I'm a member of the Cranley Leisure Centre and I'm also a Cranley Parish Councillor.
Thank you. And yes.
Thank you. Regarding Cranley Leisure Centre, all my children are all members of the swim club, so thanks.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. Just to confirm that I'm also a Cranley Parish Councillor as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So if that's all, we come to agenda item 4, which is my announcements. Just to say that will be of no surprise to those who have been there just how busy this year can be. Visiting local organisations is always eye-opening. There is really brilliant work being done by volunteers all across this community, but every group that I've visited, they all need better and more reliable funding. So funding, thanks to those who bought tickets and came to the fundraising concert at Charterhouse and to those who donated. And there will be 2 further occasions for you to attend and support the work of the Meath and Skillway. There will be a carol service on Sunday, December the 10th, and a quiz night on February the 9th. Waverley has commemorated the Emergency Services Day and Ukraine Independence Day by flying the appropriate flags. And we are in the middle of Black History Month, and there is a flag flying outside, and hence the ribbons. We acknowledge the current conflict in the Holy Land, and the following statement from me is on our website. I'm going to read it tonight. Waverley Borough Council condemns the appalling attacks on Israel by Hamas. Residents across our borough have been shocked and upset by the senseless loss of life. Our thoughts are with the innocent and vulnerable people caught up in these tragic events in Israel, in Gaza, and in the West Bank. We stand against all aggression, all discrimination, and acts of terror. and we ask for calm and understanding at this time. We respect everyone, those of faith and those of none. For local government is based on the fundamental principle that communities are stronger when they support each other. We stand for justice, for peace, for shalom, for salam. So may we all stand now for 1 minute, please. Thank you. Agenda item 5, leaders' announcements. Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and good evening, members. I'm sure you'll all be pleased to know that with the exception of a short statement from Councillor Townsend on some urgent matters, I intend to yield the entire time from the Leader and Exec announcement section so that we can crack on with the other fairly weighty items on the list tonight. So at that point, I'll ask Councillor Townsend to make her statement on urgent matters.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the planning team for their Herculean effort in improving the performance of this council. In the most recent quarter that was considered by the Secretary of State for non-major applications, our performance was 97% against the required threshold of 70%. This is down to the hard work and dedication of our officers and contract workers as well, against the backdrop of COVID, the imposition of home working, a significant increase in non-major applications, and the major teething problems of our new IT system. These considerable efforts mean that the council was not designated by the Secretary of State, and this was formally confirmed by the government on the 4th of October. I also just wanted to quickly wish every success to the Business Improvement District ballots in Godalming and in Farnham that are currently taking place, and the results will be declared on the 1st of November. I'm delighted that Waverley has continued to support this process from the original viability study to the issuing of the ballot and beyond when we collect the levy, hopefully. And I do hope that there will be a successful bid outcome. Both Godalming and Farnham have produced excellent 5-year business plans which outline the key projects that the bids will deliver through the levy. And these have been circulated with the ballot to the wider business community for them to consider when casting their votes. As well as raising money through the levy, bids also have the potential to generate additional income. And across the UK, this has amounted to some 15% over a 5-year term of the bid. And all the funds raised by the bid are controlled directly by the businesses that pay for them. I would like to thank again wholeheartedly to all those involved in these bids. There is an awful lot of work involved in getting them to this stage and in moving the plans forward. And we are so very lucky in Waverley to have business leaders who are committed to improving the communities in which they work, not just for their own businesses, but for the wider business community, for our residents and also visitors. So fingers crossed for a positive result. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Townsend. And with that, Madam Mayor, I yield back the remaining time to you.
Thank you very much indeed. And there are no questions from members of the public, so we'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is questions from members of the council. There are 2 questions received, published and circulated as a supplement to this agenda. So firstly, may I call upon Councillor Austin to read out your question, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Waverley Borough Council recently disclosed that it's the third worst performing council in the country for staff turnover in its planning department. The national average for district and borough councils is 16%. Waverley's planning team currently has a staff turnover of 47%. Our partner, Guildford Borough Council, follows close behind at 40%. Would the planning portfolio holder please advise of the actions being taken to improve the staff turnover issue, and also confirm the current members of interim or staff agency staff versus full-time members of staff in the planning team? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Councillor Townsend, would you like to respond?
I would, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Austin for her question, which highlights a national crisis in planning officer retention and recruitment across the country. The politically independent Local Government Chronicle, who reported this information last year, received replies from 276 councils. And amongst those who responded, only 1 in 10 council planning departments were fully staffed, and a quarter had a staff turnover rate of 20% or more. London and the home counties were reported to be the worst affected, as Waverley has one of the highest housing costs outside of London. It is also not difficult to see that this could be a barrier to attracting planning officers whose skills are easily transferable. Our figures, which include the high turnover of contract staff, could be seen as having a distorting effect on our final figure. It is also difficult to draw too many parallels across the councils who responded without inspecting the source data to ensure that the permanent and contractor staff were given equal weight when calculating total turnover figures. The article quoted reasons for the difficulty in attracting planning officers, quoting the combination of low numbers of new entrants to the planning profession and the loss of many older, highly skilled professionals through retirement or moves to employment within other sectors or fields. From our experience, the private sector salaries can exceed those afforded by the public sector, and these major factors remain difficult for the council to counterbalance. However, in anticipation of the continued recruitment issues, you'll be aware that this administration secured an additional budget of £350,000 to fund a series of initiatives to improve the planning service. Some of these measures are aimed at recruitment campaigns, in addition to improving planning officer roles and enhancing fulfilment levels and creating a more positive environment. However, in the meantime, given the national crisis around the shortage of planners and competition for candidates between the public and private sectors, the council, like many other councils across the country, expects turnover to remain high and in the interim period to rely on temporarily covering vacant posts with able and experienced contractors, whilst we run our recruitment campaign for permanent positions and investigate potential apprenticeship opportunities. And in answer to Councillor Austin's final question, there are currently 44 posts within the planning service, of which 14 posts are currently covered by contract staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. And our second question, may I call upon Councillor Barker-Lomax to read her question?
Thank you. We welcome that Waverley is working with Wilmer Hill Sports Association to enable the community to enjoy the pitches at the Edge. We welcome too the progress that is being made on reopening the hall at the Edge. Further to the meeting arranged by Jeremy Hunt with Waverley's leader, plus Tom Horwood of Waverley Borough Council and Tim Oliver of Surrey County Council, will the leader now confirm 3 things, please? 1, that the hall at the Edge will reopen this calendar year. 2, that the community clubs who have done so much to raise funds for the Edge will be given the right to enjoy the sporting facilities at and in the Edge. And 3, that Waverley will work with the community clubs and associations to find long-term solutions, such as disability funding, to ensure the financial viability of the Edge.
Thank you. And Leader, would you like to respond, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Councillor Lomax, thank you for your statement and your questions. Before I address these, I would just like to correct one part though. The meeting with Jeremy Hunt and the Leader of the County, I arranged those meetings, which is why they were held here. Just as I arranged the previous meeting with the Leader of the County the last time we hit an impasse with the County Council. Now, I flag this not to be petty or pedantic, but because I want to be clear how many times Waverley has had to intervene to break through some of the issues at play here. Some of them real, but many of them created by the problematic interventions of politicians at all levels. Now, on to your specific questions. It is collectively our hope that that is the case. Now, we're aiming for the end of November at the latest, subject to the continuation of those relatively smooth discussions with the owner of the building, Surrey County Council. Now, we've actually received the heads of terms from Surrey County Council to look at today at 4 o'clock. So that is the absolute latest update that I can give right now. And obviously I welcome the progress that's been made and want to thank our officers for the hard work that they have put in getting this dealt with in a short space of time and for pursuing the county officers to make sure these things have been done properly. Now, as to your second question, it will be a commercial building. And so all the community clubs will have the right to use it subject to the usual conditions of the use of a leisure centre. There won't be any restrictions on that. And then finally, on your last question, we've obviously been looking at all these things as we go, and I've made every effort to explore as many types of funding streams as possible. But I do want to take this opportunity to actually thank you, because acknowledging the financial viability of the Edge is actually a question that requires a solution, is something that I've been struggling to get certain individuals to do. In fact, I was in the deeply surreal situation of having to remind the Chancellor of the Exchequer that council services cost money to run. And so it's good to see at least one political associate of the Chancellor actually accept this reality in public. So thank you very much, Councillor Lomax. And with that, Madam Mayor, I yield back to you.
Thank you very much. And just so that I don't miss Father Jonathan disappearing, doing a little magic act, may I just say thank you very much for coming, and please give our best wishes to your congregations. You're very welcome to stay till 6:30, but you're very welcome to go as well. So thank you.
On behalf of the church communities and communities, thank you for all your work on our behalf.
Thank you. So we come now to agenda item number 8, which is the Cranley Leisure Centre new build. Leader, would you like to move the recommendation from the executive, please?
Many thanks, Madam Mayor, and I do so move. And I would like to, with your agreement, delegate this to Councillor Townsend, who's been a stalwart leading this process right from the get-go. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would also just like to say that I am joined by lead officers online this evening, and also in the chamber, finance officers in the chamber as well. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank those officers so far for all their hard work and dedication, and for keeping this project firmly on track. This project is supported by a viable business case and strongly aligns with this administration's corporate strategy, including improving the health and well-being of our residents and supporting a strong, resilient local economy. And equally important, our serious commitment to become a carbon neutral council by 2030. The current Cranley Centre is a significant contributor to our carbon footprint and contributes 11% to that footprint at present. I am delighted to be working with Architects GT3, who delivered St Sidwell's Point Passive House Leisure Centre in Exeter, and who are also currently working on the Passive House Leisure Centre in Spelthorne. Many councillors attended the briefing on Passive House provided by our energy consultants, Gale and Snowden, and have seen the projected and significant long-term energy consumption benefits, potentially up to a 70% saving. We have taken a cautious approach in our projections and included a 50% savings in our plan. Passive House is the only standard with proven evidence that can assure savings at this scale. It includes a very detailed process for quality assurance, and the certification ensures the project is built as designed with predicted returns to the general fund in year 2. The report before you shows a significant increase in budget required to progress to the next detailed design stage. And I can assure councillors that the procurement process will be used to fix costs where this is appropriate and beneficial to this council. It is difficult to compare our initial capital budget agreed back in December 2021, which was based on a traditional build leisure centre. Not surprisingly, the costs have also been negatively, as well as the Passive House, the costs have also been negatively impacted by spiralling inflationary pressures and the catastrophic effect of the mini budget, which inflation skyrocketed then to 10.1%, and the accompanying rise in the cost of materials and associated fees. As you will note, we subsequently also carried out a budget review, which highlighted the key differences between the two cost plans, and these are outlined in your papers at point 7.16 of the report. Having completed stages 1 and 2 of this project, we are now ready to move to the next detailed design stage, whilst exploring any opportunities to reduce costs that do not impact significantly on the facilities mix, and importantly, the accessibility options. This stage will also include a detailed development of the cost plan with, as I have already mentioned, the quality assurance built in. The revised capital budget of 31.1 million is shown in the exempt annex with the use of 18 million capital receipts, earmark reserve, Section 106 contributions, and internal borrowing of approximately 11 million. And as detailed in your report at 10.3, higher borrowing costs of up to 18 million have been fully considered against the impact on our Treasury management, and this is still within the limits set by the Council in our Treasury management strategy. This is a huge opportunity to future-proof the leisure centre in Cranley, to build an exemplar, accessible, low energy and low carbon building, and to continue to provide much needed and valued health and wellbeing services to residents in Cranley and the surrounding villages. Thank you. Thank you, Lead. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Are there any speakers? Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As per my declaration, 3 of my children are members of Cranley Swim Club. So we spend as a family 4 to 5 evenings of every single week at Cranley Leisure Centre. So I'm very well placed to wholeheartedly agree that Cranley is in need of a new leisure centre. You are today asking us to approve a budget of £31.1 million, an increase of 50% on your 2021 feasibility study for a low carbon Passive House certified leisure centre. Councillors have, however, only been given less than the bare bones of information upon which to base our decision and no alternative options. Passive House specification. The feasibility study cost of nearly 20 million was to, and I quote, deliver a low carbon new build leisure centre to a minimum of Passive House standard. Why does this report therefore cite achieving this Passive House certification as a reason for the huge increase in budget? You had already reported to Council this spec was included and okayed progress on this basis. If we take the original 20 million budget and compound this using actual build cost inflation over that period to the present, we reach a revised cost of just over £23 million. I therefore can't account for the additional 8 million you're requesting. Let's say add £1 million to allow for the other costs, like you using the wrong area measurement. We are still many millions of pounds apart. The councillor briefing alluded to a low carbon option too, so I requested details of this and received the response this afternoon. Option 2 financials are also exempt, so I cannot discuss publicly, except to say it's cheaper, the carbon reduction is not far off what Passive House hopes to achieve, and the year's payback period for the whole building is substantially less than the Passive House option. Just to confirm, the 9 to 15 years payback period stated in the agenda only refers to the Passive House element of the build cost. The payback period for the whole Passive House leisure centre, as per the exempt annex, may be described with reference to many decades. Now, specification. We've been asked to assume the existing specification. Various specifications have been used in reports in the last 2 years. Cranley's official website reflects the feasibility study and describes a substantially different specification to existing, with a moving teaching pool floor, steam room, concerningly fewer pool lanes than the current 6. What is clear is that the end specification will be different. So for us to assume current spec for this £31 million expenditure is wrong. Cranley residents and group have not been consulted yet. Are you not putting the cart before the horse? It's important to Cranley stakeholders of input to ensure the specification is correct before council can agree to the budget. For example, if it's determined an 8-lane pool is required, that cost would then be in addition to the current 31.1 million number, and you'll be coming back to council for more budget. I don't think anyone in this room disagrees with the intention to deliver a well-insulated leisure centre. We cannot, however, make an informed decision on whether Passive House spec is an appropriate use of taxpayers' money unless we can view the whole costs and final specification in the round. I would therefore want a deferral until councillors receive further information. If this is not acceptable, with regret, I request councillors reject this huge expenditure at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I too want a new leisure centre in Cranley, and I want it to be carbon efficient and well insulated. But I have a problem in making a decision concerning this matter when I don't have all the information I need to make that decision. We don't have the specification upon which this money has been calculated. All it says is current facility mix, whatever that means. How many lanes are we to have in the pool? Is the audience area to be the same as before, etc., etc.? And I would have thought that when you're asking for a lot of money to be spent, we need to know what we're getting for our money, apart from a Passive House building, so far as the main structure is concerned. We don't have, although Councillor Austin has seen it, the other information concerning the other option. And we ought to be comparing the other options to see which is best value for money, taking into account we want to obviously be carbon efficient. At the moment, we're being told this is the scheme, take it or leave it. We do not have the benefit of consultation of users, which might change the currently unknown specification. We don't have a detailed explanation of the huge increase in costs. The explanation, as Councillor Austin has eloquently stated, do not account for the total increase from 19.95 million to 31.14 million. I don't know if we borrow the mega monies, how it could affect other projects in future concerning carbon neutrality and other matters. The pink papers show the current horrendous payback period, and it could cost more after we've had the consultation. Seems to me there's no point making a decision to build a leisure centre with facilities that may not be wanted, or as a leisure centre which is missing facilities that we do want. And I feel strongly that until we have the information of exactly what we're getting and knowing it is what the people of Cranley want, to make a decision now to spend such a large sum of money, very much as has been stated already, 50% above what originally had been indicated to us 2 years ago. I therefore too feel there should be a deferral so that this information can be put forward, and I so propose. And I have a seconder.
Councillor Goodrich, would you be very clear on the amendment that you are proposing, please?
I'm clearly seeking a deferral of this decision so that further information can be obtained as I've outlined, a detailed specification, comparison for another alternative method of build, the benefit of a consultation with users, which hasn't happened yet, and more detailed explanation of the increase in costs.
Who's seconding? Thank you. So we are now debating that amendment. Do we have any speakers, Leader?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to raise a point of order because calling a deferral when literally nobody has had an opportunity to actually say anything really about the item yet is really the case. So from my point of view, a deferral is entirely unnecessary at this point. We haven't actually properly debated any of the substance whatsoever. And I think a reasonable thing to do would have been to wait till at least maybe 2-3 other members had actually managed to get a word in. In terms of information, there has been ample information in the pack that we've been provided. There has been a presentation from the Passive House provider. I have to double check, but I think this has been to ONS at least twice. And I don't recall a single recommendation to executive from either of those sessions at ONS. Councillors have obviously had ample time to ask Democratic Services and officers in the department in question if there was any information that they did not have. Naturally, Councillors Goodridge, etc., have waited to make that clear now that they don't have enough information, literally at council. I would hope that perhaps Councillor Goodridge will indicate when he's asked for the information that he is feeling is missing, when he's put that to the portfolio holder so that she's been aware of what information he felt he needed and his group needed. At least one councillor indicated that they did do that and has had that information received. So from my point of view, a deferral is not only unnecessary until we've actually had any kind of real debate on the subject, but frankly, really, we're having a practice now where we wait until we're in council to ask for information that could quite reasonably have been asked at quite literally any other time. So members, I urge you to strike down this amendment to defer so we can actually have the debate on the substance and give the people of Cranley a good leisure centre, which, to be quite honest, anybody who's actually visited that leisure centre will know the mix that we're talking about without having to look at papers or any further detail, and will know how absolutely urgent it is to deal with. Let other members have a chance to speak on the subject, members, and I'm sure we will answer the questions that you have.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend, then Councillor Goodridge, and then yes, so Councillor.
Just saying, Madam Mayor, I'm happy to defer my amendment to allow more further debate first, if you feel that would be appropriate.
Thank you. It is the advice that we continue with the amendment. So we have an amendment, a seconded amendment to withdraw, to defer. Councillor Townsend.
First of all, the Cranley Leisure Centre is in bad condition, as Councillor Follows, as the leader has said, you know, anyone that goes around it will know that it's in bad condition. We've had a condition survey. We know there are underlying issues which need to be addressed. Every day that goes past, there is a risk that the plant will fail. If the plant fails, then Cranley will have no leisure centre, and Councillor Austin won't be able to take her children there because it won't be open. So we have to be pragmatic about the risks that we face every single day. I would say that Councillor Austin has not asked for the figures on the 50-year projection, and I'm not going to stray into exempt, but the Passive House comes out in a very positive light and in fact will save in the long term this council money. So therefore we have not made this decision lightly. We are doing this based on sound financial prudence. I would also say that the facility mix has undergone, and there's been countless reports that have come to council about this, about the facility mix. It is based on need. It is based on a full and formal assessment of need. There will be no 8-lane pool. The facility mix is set as it is. And that has, as I said, has been said, it has been to ONS several times. We can't go and assess the costs unless we go to detailed design phase, which is what we need to do this evening to agree the budget, to go to that detailed design phase so that we can have a full outline of costs Unless we agree the budget, we cannot move forward. And I would also say that discussions about not involving stakeholders, we have met with key stakeholders around the Cranley Leisure Centre and spoken to them. We've already engaged the market, we've engaged the health centre, we've engaged the co-op, we've engaged the parish council. So the fuller consultation will take place once we have something to show people, which is the detailed design phase. And then we will take obviously commentary back from the larger and wider group of stakeholders. So I really feel that the delay of this project would only open this council up to risk. And really, I cannot tell you, the plant in that area is holding on by its fingernails. We will be exposing not only the risk of the plant failing, but the risk of us not having any leisure centre, not having any income coming in from that either. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murray, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Apologies for being late. I'd just like to say that I had some concerns and similar concerns to Councillor Austin about the facilities and the overspend and where it came from. But I did email the portfolio holder a couple of days ago, asked her some very specific questions about why the overspend was and what facilities would the people of Cranley be getting for their 30 million. She answered very detailed and allayed all my fears. So thank you to the portfolio holder, and I don't agree that there should be a deferment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Merriweather, followed by Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, we've heard the expression cart before the horse, and I think the cart before the horse here is expecting us to predetermine the outcome of the next phase of work that we're actually contemplating before we do it. We also seem to have some wires crossed somewhere. The point of this project is that it pays for itself. It is not paid for by taxpayers' money. It pays for itself. The other point is that the bill cost inflation, Councillor Austin referred to actual bill cost inflation. But of course, the actual bill cost inflation is the bill cost inflation we're experiencing. It's not some index. And we all know that there's a whole spectrum of indices out there that you can refer to. Bottom line is the inflation is what it is, and it's not on what's on an index. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. Of course, we all want a new leisure centre for Cranley. My concern is that not enough work has been done on the financials here. I've got the pink papers in front of me, which have the analysis to justify the 31 million. And the payback period is measured in decades, rather like the payback period that was seen for the acquisition and the expenditure on 69 High Street in Godalming. I think this may be the right answer, but we need to consider other options. There are other options before us. Option B, as I understand it, would get us most of the way to the passive house design concept that the 31 million is talking about, but could be done with significantly better payback. So, of course, we want to be environmentally sensitive. We want to do the best thing that we can and have a state-of-the-art facility in Cranley. But I do think this administration forgets the financials and delivering best value for money for the taxpayers. And of course, the taxpayer money is involved here and substantial amounts of interest are being paid. There are ways, I'm sure, in which things could be done in a different way. And I think full council ought to see more than one option to see whether there is a better value for money option available. And I think that should be done by way of deferring this. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, may I propose a motion? Under 1411D, may I take a motion to request an immediate vote on this deferral motion?
Madam Mayor, just to advise you on the motion that's been proposed as a closure motion to move immediately to a vote on the amendment. That is within your gift if you consider there has been sufficient discussion. But before doing so, you would need to, I believe the seconder may or may not have reserved her speech till later, and you would need to give a right of reply to the proposer of the amendment. If you felt that the debate on the amendment was sufficient, you could then move to a vote after those two speakers.
Thank you. I am minded to agree that we have had sufficient time. Sorry, I think we might have a point of order. Oh, is there a point of order?
I'm not sure, Madam Mayor, but I did indicate before the leader indicated that I wished to speak.
Yep. Not seen. Yep. There are others as well who've not spoken. So I am minded to say that we have had plenty of time discussing the amendment to defer. But, so do they both get to speak? Your second time, right? Yes. 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 Councillor Austin, you have a right to reply.
Thank you. I will reply. First of all, I'll just state I could see a number of hands up for people who wanted to speak. So I personally don't feel that we were anywhere near finishing discussing that amendment. I believe that in all of these cases, we're always talking about taxpayers' money. For starters, where does that money come from? This leisure centre, what is important is that we have a once in two generation opportunity to make sure that we get the specification of this right. And I feel that we need to get, even if it means we go a little bit slower now, and my children have to, you know, spend time, and I have to spend more time on those uncomfortable benches, we need to get that right now before and look at different options before we go ahead and commit to spending £31 million of money. I don't feel that we have been through anywhere near the correct level of consultation. I don't feel comfortable that I've received anywhere near a scope of work or specification, all of the standard things that I would expect to receive in terms of if I'm making any decision in my role, my previous day job as an asset manager. I just can't believe that we could make such a huge decision without all of the information that we need in front of us. Therefore, I would implore you all to reconsider and let's defer this and talk about it soon when we have more information.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. You too have a right to reply.
I shall be brief. It makes it clear in the conclusion that when the project's been designed and following stakeholder consultation, the facility mix will be refined or could well be refined. And there's talk in the report that it may cost more when the facility mix has been redefined. And it seems to me that it'd be quicker in the long term to get the specification and what the people want in Cranley sorted first, rather than designing something. Then we find out the cost that produces, and then we have to redesign it again to take into account the result of the consultation. It seems to me consultation in detail, and for us councillors to be told what the specification is, would be something which is essential before you can make a decision of this magnitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. And so for the avoidance of all doubt, Susan's going to read us the what we're going to be voting on. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, just to be clear, councillors are now going to be asked to vote for, against or abstain on the proposed amendment, which is to defer this item until after a detailed specification has been provided and consultation and more detail about the proposal generally. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ben, you're going to launch. Oh, Councillor Hyman, have you a point of order?
My apologies, completely forgot. Yes, under Article 12 of the Constitution, which is the decision rules regarding decision making, that we must have all the relevant information when we are making a decision. I really don't feel that we've had sufficient discussion here to be able to vote, knowing where we're going. If I can refer you please to page 41, which is the decision that's already been made by this council, which was back on the 14th of December 2021. Page 41, 7.4, the final bullet point says to ask officers to report back to members when final costs, design, preferred contractor and precise funding arrangements are known. So that's what are the arrangements at the moment that are in place. And if we go to the page before, which is the recommendations to council, you will see that we are losing the right to have that. And I think it's vital that we discuss in this deferral motion, which I have some sympathy for, but not entirely. I think we have the right to
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. You've
for
made
people
your
to
point.
know that they are giving away the power to
You've made your point.
which has already been agreed.
Thank you.
So if we may continue the debate, I would like to.
Madam Mayor, if I've understood correctly, I think Councillor Hyman's point of order is that he is asserting that Article 12 of the Constitution, which is the decision-making principles, have not been complied with on the basis that there's insufficient information before the council this evening to make this decision. I would stress that in terms of the proposed amendment, it was an amendment to defer the item, and I believe there is sufficient information for members to decide whether or not to defer the item. On the substantive item itself, if the amendment fails, you will revert to the substantive item, and there is further opportunity now for members to debate that.
Thank you. I think that is very clear. So we're going to move to the vote for or against the amendment to defer. Then are we ready to vote?
Madam Mayor, we have a few councillors still haven't cast their vote.
When it flashes.
If I may, Madam Mayor, the flashing is covered by the new for, abstain and against. And so many members, me included, missed it. So I was also expecting the screen to show the vote so that we could all see what was happening. And so could members of the public. My apologies, Madam Mayor.
Okay, we're going to do it.
To council, what, just start again. Start again. Madam Mayor, we're going to ask councillors to vote again. I'm sorry, we've had a technical issue with the electronic voting. I think some of the stickers are over your voting mechanism. We're going to ask councillors to all vote again, but just to be clear, that the voting will not show on the screen until all members have cast their vote. Yeah.
Yes.
Madam Mayor, we don't seem to have a vote from councillor Denis. If it is intended to be an abstention, then could you indicate?
It's been received.
It's been received, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We now have the result, which we will then shortly put on the screen, but it is 12 votes for, 2 abstentions and 31 against. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So the amendment falls. That has not been carried, and we go back to the recommendation. Are there any speakers on the recommendation? Yes, thank you. Councillor Reid.
Madam Mayor.
Did you have a point of order?
I don't know whether it's clear to everyone else. It certainly wasn't clear to me, but it would have helped me tremendously in that last vote if someone had said, vote now, because I think we were all pushing buttons because we didn't know we were ready to vote. So if that would be very helpful for any future vote. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I went to take a close look at the leisure centre on the 11th of October, since a site visit for councillors hadn't, to my knowledge, been organised. I must admit on my way there, I was somewhat negative, since in the matter of a 2-year period, the costs had escalated from 20 million to 31.1 million now. I was given a tour by the very experienced General Manager, Sean Murphy, who's been at the Cranley Leisure Centre for over 10 years. And he showed me clearly why the building is on its last legs and systems could fail at any time. I won't go into it, but it's absolutely obvious that things are worn out. Filters could burst at any time because they're leaking. And in fact, the huge filters had the centre actually built on top of them, so they're not easy to replace. So the pool is literally on borrowed time. Cranley does need a new leisure centre. There's no doubt about that. I don't suppose there's anybody in the room that would deny that. And to quote Sean Murphy, to approve a new leisure centre or lose it, since the clock is ticking. Losing it would mean the growing population of Cranley not having a leisure centre at all, which would not be acceptable. My main concern here is that we're being asked to approve a figure of 31.1 million, yet throughout the agenda, there are caveats. And you can check your agendas, colleagues. On page 42, 7.14, it refers to the indicative high-level cost for the design brief of circa which is not precise, of 31.1 million. Page 43, 7.17. F&G will further develop the costs throughout the next phases as the final facility mix is agreed. Page 44, 7.34. It's important to note that the indicative programme is subject to the planning process and also to the change when the building contractor is procured. Page 45, 10.1, based on the estimated cost of 31.1 million. Page 45, 10.5, once tenders have been received and final costs of this scheme are known, the viability will be updated and all assumptions contained in Annex 1 will be reviewed. So along with Councillor Austin and Goodrich, who have made some very valid points, I would suggest that would it not be more prudent to establish and agree the facility mix and the full specification first, then go out to tender to suitable contractors, and then come back to council with a recommendation to approve a cost based on an agreed scheme. I know this was mentioned earlier, but what I've written, I'm concerned that what we're being asked to approve this evening is putting the cart before the horse and will lead to the council being asked to approve further unbudgeted funds in the future. So I'm afraid that tonight, however this debate goes, I won't be voting for this, but if it comes back to council with more information in the near future, then I'd be very well minded to approve it and to vote for it. But I think as it stands, it's too iffy. There could be budget overruns until we really know what is being proposed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I agree very much with Councillor Hess. I am surprised that Councillor Austin's received information today that we can't consider really the rest of us before we make a decision here. Cranley obviously does need a leisure centre. I was chairman of ONS back in 2017 when we were did an in-depth review into our leisure centres, and I think Cranley's been on borrowed time ever since then. It's still functioning. I know we've had to spend money on it for it to do so. The issue here, there is a big issue. Are we committed to always providing leisure centres? No, we're not. It's this is our discretionary service. Are we committed to copying this exemplar across the rest of our borough, which obviously we're encouraging other people to do? If we've got an exemplar for others to copy across the country, are we going to do this in all of our leisure centres? I know we're putting PV panels on the roofs of some Farnhams who've got a difficulty with that. What would it cost if we were going to do that? If we're looking to the future and we're doing this, what would it cost? How much? Can we afford it? Can we afford what we've got here? And from the figures that I've seen, I'm not entirely sure we can. You think of Guildford, Nash Bridge, and things that councils can trip over. There is no limit on this, and I've asked for a red line. Where's the red line in this? Where are we going to stop if it goes to 35, 40, 45, 50, 80 million? The Memorial Hall went to more than 5 times the initial projection. All of this is based on, all the finances are based on projections of future income. It tells us what the costs are, and of course those are all open to change. But if we go to page 45, members, paragraph 10.5 tells us that once tenders have been received and final costs of this scheme are known, the viability will be updated and all assumptions contained in Annex 1 will be reviewed. Right, but we're not going to have a part in that review, because at the beginning of the item on page 39, we've got the recommendation to council, and the recommendations are that all decisions are basically delegated from now on. So the original decision at paragraph 7.4, which I mentioned in the point of order, goes by the board. We are having the right to make the final decision taken away from us if we vote in favour of this. And I'd like that the leader, if he would, to make an amendment to bring this back when we know the details that are the current situation. Ask officers to report it back to members for our decision, of course, when final cost, design, preferred contractor and precise funding arrangements are known, because I don't want to lose that right. I'm responsible for this, as are other members. But we would have no control whatsoever over it. I think we should have the choice of the specifications, look at what we're doing before we make the decision. And in that much, I agree with the opposition position on this. And I think it would be irresponsible for us not to agree with their position. When we look at paragraph 715, 7.4, 7.17, they basically tell us that, there's more work to be done. And we need to make the decision after the work's been done. And whilst I'm absolutely appreciative of the work that has been done to get us where we are, I think to say that this is being taken away from us, I would implore the leader to put forward a motion to himself rather than one of us have to do it in order to reinstate this coming back to us. So that in effect to reinstate what is at the end of paragraph 7.4 on page 41 to ask officers to report back, just to add that in. And I'd ask the leader to do that and I'll happily vote for it. Otherwise, I'll have to vote against. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Point of personal explanation, Madam Mayor.
One moment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Hyman's speech has just highlighted an issue because he's made reference to the delegation to the Joint Director for Place. I just wanted to be clear with all members that that decision was a decision made by the executive. That's not a matter before council this evening. The only part of the recommendations which have been moved and seconded this evening are within council's remit, are in respect of the revised capital budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, did you want to make a point? We have other speakers.
Thank you for that. I was actually just going to request that one of the officers who's present on the Zoom may be able to give a more definitive response regarding the matter of the mix and where that is established from, i.e. need, rather than what people might necessarily want if you ask them on the street. I would possibly request if one of the officers could comment.
Kelvin, if you can hear us, would you like to speak for a moment?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Leader. There's been lots of discussion regarding the facility mix, and I would refer members to the background papers that are listed at section 19. So the facility mix has not changed since the need was identified right at the start in 2019. So that is why we refer to the facility mix remains the same. That is based on need, based on growth of population in the Cranley and surrounding area, and up to the next 30 years. So we have very clearly defined facility mix laid out in all of those papers, which is what we are deciding on now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelvin. I think that endorses what Councillor Townsend said at the beginning. Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. About 5 years ago, I had the slightly dubious privilege of commissioning a building in Surrey of approximately the same size and complexity. It was Surrey Police Headquarters. It was quite a daunting time, especially as we moved from the rather airy-fairy feasibility study and all the rest of it to a detailed design. And we got real people out there tendering for a real project, and that's where things really came down to earth. And the single thing that helped me, the single metric, most important metric, was what was happening elsewhere. And in terms of pounds per square metre of build. And so I commissioned a study of other police headquarters around the country who had just been completed and said, how much did it cost them? And if their estimates were markedly different from what we were being told, then obviously some serious questions had to be asked. And all I wanted to say is, I hope we can follow the same process as part, of course, as we move forward and look very carefully at what's happening elsewhere to make quite sure that we're not missing the trick and learning from an example. Best of luck. I've no doubt at all that costs will rise again. I don't think that 30 million, we've heard the last of it at all, but I'm in favour of going ahead with this with all the reasons giving. Cranley needs a leisure centre, and we've got to be bold, got to be ambitious, and get on with it.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. There are 4 other speakers I have: Councillor Higgins, Councillor Beaman, Councillor Coburn, and Councillor Clark. Councillor Hyman, you have a point of order?
Yes, it is under Article 12 again. It's in respect of, sorry to interrupt the people who want to speak, but I'm just going back one step to the response that was given to us by the officer, Kelvin Mills, at 7.15 on page 42. If members would read that. Says during the next detailed design phase, the design team will consult with stakeholders and explore other options which would reduce the build cost. However, it's important to note this would require changes to the original facility mix scope and would impact on the services and facilities currently provided. And I don't think that what Mr. Mills has told us is in agreement with what it says in the paper. So I'd like to know which one is true, whether it's 7.15 or what we've just been told verbally. Thank you very much.
Point of personal explanation in regards to Councillor Hyman's point of order.
Yes, I'm not sure.
My reading of 7.5, a project working group was duly formed past tense to deliver a new leisure facility at Cranley that will meet the demands of the local community in terms of facility mix, but also deliver a low carbon building in accordance with Waverley's net zero carbon by 2030 commitment. Is that not entirely agreeing with Kelvin's statement and Councillor Townsend's, in that it's a past tense group that met to discuss a thing and has reported, generating this report?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think the point of order raised by Councillor Hyman again is that under Article 12 of the Constitution relating to the general principles of decision making, that there's insufficient information. But I do agree with the representations just made by Councillor Follows that I don't see a discrepancy by what was said by the officer and what's said in the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. So we're moving back to speakers, and we have Councillor Higgins, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm pleased to see this come to council because it's an extremely important matter for residents of Ewhurst and Ellens Green who use Cranley Leisure Centre. Residents use Cranley Leisure Centre for a variety of reasons, but I've seen firsthand, like Councillor Austin, the importance it plays in teaching children how to swim. Cranley Leisure Centre was constructed in 1969, and I believe it had a projected lifespan of around 40 years. We're almost 15 years beyond that projected lifespan. Before this project came to council, I was hoping that any proposals would future-proof the leisure centre, together with ensuring it was environmentally friendly. The proposal to build a passive house standard ticks all those boxes. The more I've looked into passive house, the more I've been impressed with the results it produces, in particular the savings it makes on energy. These aren't just projected savings. We can see real world examples of how passive house has made energy savings for leisure centres and homeowners. Councillors rightly raise questions regarding the costs, and it will be extremely important to minimise costs as the project progresses. However, renovating or building a new leisure centre to standards below passive house will cost more in the long term. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but sometimes you have to accept that you have to spend money to save money. As detailed in the report, the savings will mean we get a payback within 9 to 15 years. That won't happen if we build to a lower standard. Cranley Leisure Centre has lasted over 50 years with 1960 construction methods. By building to a higher standard and future-proofing the leisure centre, I suspect residents will benefit from this new leisure centre for even longer. I would like to finish by thanking Councillor Townsend and the officers for their hard work over a number of years on this. It's an extremely exciting project. It demonstrates this council's ambition to benefit residents for the long term. Accordingly, I will be fully supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. We have Councillor Beaman next.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Well, we've been talking about this for years now, and we have to come to a final decision. I'll make 2 points. One, in the cost estimate, there's a significant contingency element, which could, of course, cover any changes to the specification that arise subsequently. And the second point I'd like to point out is the operators of the leisure centres make a financial contribution to the running of the council. And therefore, you know, we really ought to do the best for them. And I think we're just deferring something that we know has to be done. And certainly I know that several years ago, in fact, the leisure centre had to be closed because of the pool. So we're not talking on borrowed time. I think we're on a very thin piece of string. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beeman. We have Councillor Coburn next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was a little surprised when I read the draft minutes of the ONS meeting because I don't think it quite captured the debate we did have on this issue. And it was the surprise element of the sheer amount of money. And in fact, I seem to recall one of us, maybe me, using the phrase eye-wateringly high. And Kelvin Mills, he's still there, he can confirm, he actually agreed with that description of the money. It was this sudden nature. That meeting took place just after we'd had half an hour of just the Passive House, which was fine. They are people who earn their money. So obviously all we saw were the plus points of Passive House. Absolutely splendid, nothing to touch it. We haven't had any other information. And this was brought out at ONS. Everyone supports Cranley Leisure Centre. We've supported it, as Councillor Hyman has said, for many a long year. And it was a task group from the ONS that, of course, you know, was set up and did the work. But what I'm saying, and what we said at ONS, whether or not it was in the draft minutes, and those minutes have not been approved yet, we did actually debate the fact that we had not had enough information. We had had one side only, and we said this very clearly at the meeting. Yes, we've had this presentation from Passive House. We haven't had a presentation from somebody else who could perhaps make similar savings over perhaps better terms. We just haven't had that, and it was not brought to us, and that's why we raised objections. And I certainly don't want anyone to think that if we don't vote for this particular sum of money because we don't feel that we know why it's necessary, that we're voting against upgrading Cranley Leisure Centre. That is absolute nonsense. Some of us have fought for that for years, but we can't just come along to this council chamber and nod through millions of pounds when we don't fully understand what we're applying that money to. Yes, as I say, we've heard one side. All we're saying is we just need a little more information to give us the certainty to put this amount of money into the budget. And I raised all this, and at ONS, other people spoke as well. I certainly remember Councillor Hess speaking. So, you know, as I say, you can't equate not just going blindly along a path that we don't know where it's going to end with the Cranley Leisure Centre and saying, if we don't vote for this tonight, the whole thing is going to fall down tomorrow. I mean, that is not an argument for looking after the council taxpayers' money. And don't tell me that they're not going to pay a penny. Of course they are. I mean, that's how it all works with these projects. So basically, we are here to serve the borough. The borough serves all of us. And that's all we're saying. Give us the facts, give us some more information, and then perhaps we can support this wholeheartedly. Thank you. Councillor Follis, did you have a... Oh, okay, thank you very much. That's very clear then. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, members. I think it may be useful for new members to explain that at the 2021 meeting of council, we were told that the centre had failed its MOT and it was on its last legs. And in fact, in 2021, we were told at this meeting that the average, the maintenance cost of the centre over the next 5 years would be a staggering £7 million. That's 1.2, I think, per year. And the clock is ticking. And some members, when I've listened to what's being said this evening, seem to assume that Passive House is somehow the bogeyman. And it is perhaps part of the reason for the increase in costs. Now, I wanted more information on that, so I sought more information and I got it. So I can confirm that the Passive House element of the overall cost is 2.3 million, which is 7.5% of the overall amount. But the most important factor is the centre will pay for itself, and it will do so primarily because it is using Passive House accreditation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. We have Councillor Reid, Councillor Martin, Councillor Williams. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Several members tonight have mentioned putting the cart before the horse. I think what they're suggesting is that the council actually needs to have a full specification for this leisure centre before making any sort of decision. But to get a full specification, we're going to need to have someone working on the project and defining what is needed to meet what we assume is the requirement to date. That doesn't come free. We're going to have to spend money to do that. So we could choose to do this piecemeal and say, right, well, let's have the consultation first and get someone to put together a design, and we'll pay them this big bill for doing that, because that doesn't come cheap. Then we'll move on to the next phase. But we will never have any indication in doing that of the final cost of the project. The idea for any capital project, and I suspect that not many councillors have been involved in large capital projects, you have to have an idea of where you are going first and the likely cost. You recognise at the beginning that it won't be the actual cost. Take HS2, for example. But that aside, we need to have something. So we've got a straw man here, and we're saying at the moment, if we do this, it's going to be viable. It's going to pay for itself. Okay, it's going to take decades, but large capital projects for small local councils do take a long time to pay back, but it is viable. When we move along the path or the track, we will actually identify what the true costs are, and then if we have to pull the plug, as they have done with HS2, then that's a difficult decision we'll have to take. But we will have made good decisions on the way that we believe this is going to pay, and so we're not throwing good money after bad. One other point I would just like to raise, and Councillor Goodrich said that we haven't had a consultation. If he and his party had taken the time to canvass during the last elections and knock on the doors, they would have discovered, as all of the 6 councillors that now represent the east of the borough, that most people, in fact, I don't know of any who were not in favour of a brand new leisure centre for Cranley, and it was pointed out that this was in our manifesto. So we have got approval in a way for it from our residents. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. We have Councillor Martin next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, Madam Mayor, with this has been talked about for a long time. We talked about it in 2019. We talked about it in 2021 and gave approval for a substantial sum of money. And as has already been pointed out, part of the approval in December 2021 was to ask officers to report back to members when final costs, design, preferred contractor and precise funding arrangements are known. We're not doing that tonight. What we are doing is putting up the budget by some 50% to an eye-watering £31 million. If we were private individuals, as we are, and we were looking at a project for ourselves, for our own home, or for something of that sort, we would spend a lot of time, of course, on the specification and get it as we would want it to be. But I tell you, we'd also spend a lot of time on looking at the money and how much it costs. And I just don't think that we've spent enough time doing that. I refer members to page 51 of the agenda papers. This is the pink paper, which gives us the financial analysis, which in my judgment, much of the financial analysis and many of the assumptions made are very generous. And despite the generosity of those assumptions, when you look at the viability section of that page, down towards the bottom left-hand corner, we see the payback period, which is measured in decades. My submission, Madam Mayor, I should say, is that is too long. We have to take the money into account. And of course, we want the best possible design and the best possible outcome for the people of Cranley and a new leisure centre. But we also have to consider value for money. And I think that other options should have been considered. I believe that they were. Other options would give us almost the same level of good design that we are looking for, but would give a much lower figure and a better payback period. I think that that is what is required. And until and unless that is done, I would be voting against this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. We have Councillor Williams, Councillor Merriweather, Councillor Follows and Councillor Long. Councillor Williams.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm really surprised that the line that is actually being taken is one of insufficient information being provided, particularly, since we had a very detailed briefing, a really detailed explanation as to what Passive House Plus is and why it is not only environmentally important, but also why it actually stacks up financially. And we've had overview and scrutiny involvement in this. I mean, the real answer, I think, comes in the references made earlier by Councillor Goodridge and Councillor Austin to a building that is carbon efficient, in inverted commas, rather than Passive House standard, and referenced by Councillor Goodridge to, quote, an alternative method of build. As Councillor Clark pointed out, Passive House adds roughly 7.5% to the cost and pays for itself many times over during the life of the project. And what struck me as strange earlier on was to listen to Councillor Austin referring to taking her children to the current Cranley Leisure Centre for swimming lessons. And, that's great. But, what I want is to do my bit as a member of this council to provide a world fit for Councillor Austin's children and for future generations. And that is why we committed ourselves back in September 2019 to treating the climate crisis as a climate emergency, and for that to infuse everything that we do as a council. We are talking now about building a leisure centre that is built to modern standards with the right facilities mix, but with not just with some notional attempt at energy efficiency, which was the legacy of the aspirations of the previous administration, but a real attempt to make a difference. As Councillor Townsend pointed out, the Cranley Leisure Centre comprises around about 11% of the total carbon emissions of Waverley, of this council. And therefore, I would suggest that actually making a building to Passive House standard is actually critically important if we are taking the climate seriously in this regard. So, for my part, I would support every attempt that we make as a council to resist those attempts by Conservative councillors to blindly follow the attempt of their counterparts in Westminster to try to roll back the climate agenda. And that is exactly what we are seeing tonight. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to echo the remarks of Councillor Reid, who made them much more eloquently than I ever could. It's quite funny, it's quite ironic to hear our opposition colleagues throw around the phrase eye-watering. To my recollection, that phrase was used recently by Jeremy Hunt to describe the eye-watering inflation that has created this mess in the first place, not least because of the mini budget that we all had to suffer this time last year. So it is funny, but not in a ha-ha way, to hear that phrase being used here tonight. It's also quite interesting, weird actually, to hear colleagues say that this project is going to cost the taxpayer money in the same breath that they start talking about payback periods. A payback period is accomplished when a project has paid for itself. If the council taxpayers are going to pay for this, there isn't a payback period. So the whole point is that this project pays for itself. And once it's paid for itself, it generates revenue, it generates income that we can use to contribute towards other standards, other services. Councillor Hyman talked about a red line. To my reading, the whole point of this recommendation is to establish that red line, the amount that we will maximize on our spend and will not go over. And I can't resist, I'm afraid, the observation that Councillor Martin referred to the financials and his judgment on whether the financials stack up or not. I like to think that this council, this administration, bases its decisions on the evidence and not uninformed opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows and then Councillor Long.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I registered to speak because I hope you'll allow me to ask Councillor Townsend to sum up when we do get to the end of the debate. But can I just first off respond to Councillor Munro? I think absolutely you are completely correct. And actually the element of Passive House that I wanted to focus on when I spoke this evening was actually about the elements of it beyond the carbon saving, which I think Councillor Williams has illustrated very clearly. One of the things I learned, actually to my surprise, during that session that we had with Passive House was actually the level of cost control and building assurance that goes into that process. And the reason it has that is because it's subject to such strict external validation and verification as part of their requirements to Passive House. Now that allows us, I think, to have a lot more confidence when we do have that final specification as to whether that specification will be delivered and to what price. Now, Councillor Higgins, I won't repeat your words because they are just simply spot on, absolutely down the line. I agree with every single word you said. And Councillor Reid, I absolutely agree too. I can't recall a single resident in Cranley, or indeed the entire east of Waverley, that I've ever spoken to who doesn't just want the borough to crack on with this and then do exactly what we're doing here, which is the building of a high quality, sustainable new leisure centre for the people of Cranley, who I think have quite reasonably felt left out over the past few years with their moribund leisure centre slowly deteriorating in the corner of the village. So just to conclude, and I was wondering whether I should go here or not, but I feel like I need to swallow my immense frustration, disappointment. I'm not sure what it is, but Councillor Coburn, you spoke a lot about this at your ONS. Not a single recommendation, not a single request for more information, not a single suggestion of what we might do differently, not a request for another meeting, not another hearing to do anything about it, absolutely nothing. And Councillor Martin, if you feel like you haven't had enough information, I would just advise that you speak to the chair of the ONS responsible for the review of finance. Oh, wait, that's you, isn't it? So again, not a single recommendation, nothing from you or your committee, no request for more time, no request for information. Except now we get to council and we have the two ONS chairs asking why we haven't done enough scrutiny. There are times where you must look to yourselves. Now we must look to the people of Cranley and the people of Waverley and get on and build this leisure centre. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you indeed, Councillor Follows.
Information, if I may, Madam Chairman.
Yes.
I am simply looking at the evidence before me. It's on page 51. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Long.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've heard calls this evening to look at a second option that would enable us to save almost as much carbon with a saving of cost. And I really want to state my belief based on the information that we've had that any compromise of the Passive House standard may save on the cost of the build, but it will compromise on energy saving. In a former professional role, I was tasked with pressure testing energy saving claims to ensure that they stood up to the scrutiny of the energy industry regulators. Then, as now, the best way of saving money on energy was to ensure that you paid as little as possible by consuming less of it. And any compromise on the amount of energy that we use in the Cranley Leisure Centre leaves us open to inflated energy costs, which are only going in one direction at the moment. Councillor Hyman has reminded us that leisure centres are a discretionary service, but we don't need to go back very far to remember a passionate appeal to the council from members of the public about the threatened closure of such a discretionary service and the enormous impact that that would have on the health and well-being of our residents. So I wholeheartedly want to support the building of a new leisure centre for Cranley and to ensure that we use the gold standard of passive house technology when we do so.
Thank you. I don't see any other speakers, and we've had a long debate. So Councillor Townsend, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the support in the chamber. There are a few things which I would like to pick up. I would just like to point out to councillors that we have gone through stage 1 and 2 of this project, and this is stage 3. And it is really important that we understand that the budget that was previously allocated will not meet the facility mix that has been proposed. And why this is before you tonight is in order to progress to that detailed design phase with a realistic budget. And then that amount of budget is set. There's people talking about creep as if all of a sudden there's going to be more money. If there was going to be additional budget, that would have to become before this council. Nothing can creep unless it comes before this council itself. And I would like to remind members that, as has been said by Councillor Long and other councillors as well, we can only get the guaranteed savings with a passive house design. If we go for low energy, we can't go back to the people who presented it and go, oh, well, we're only getting 30%, you said we'd get 40. We can't do that because there is no assurance with other builds of the savings that we will achieve through passive house, as well as the savings of carbon, which must be an imperative for this council. We need to make sure that we try and do our bit towards climate change and to make sure the next generations are not paying for the mistakes that we are making now today, when we are much able to make informed decisions. And coming to informed decisions, you know, I'm a little bit at a loss without too much information or not enough information. Information has gone before in different background papers, stage 1, stage 2. In the actual presentation to council, it clearly showed the energy demands of the different types of leisure centre. It clearly showed the comparisons between a passive house build and an ordinary standard pool build. It clearly showed the payback based on, as I said before, only a 50%, which is a very conservative level of savings, a 50% on energy savings. And we are hoping for much more on those energy savings. So there still seems to be within some members of the council a little bit of a lack of understanding of what passive house actually does and the savings that can be made. There was also operational carbon emissions as well, which clearly showed how much saving we could make with a passive house. So there is a lot of information there. And you know, anyone can come to me and speak to me about this situation. Anyone can speak to the officers and ask for more information. And I'm really disappointed that if the ONS wanted more information, they didn't ask me. I wasn't invited to the meeting. No one asked me. I cannot give information if I'm not asked for it. So I am disappointed that it's taken up until this time for that information to be requested. And, you know, we need, I agree with obviously and appreciate the comments made by Councillor Higgins and Councillor Reid and Councillor Monroe as well. And I know that Councillor Martin seems all of a sudden not to understand the process. And this has happened before on the project for 69 High Street as well. We cannot go to the detailed design and find out the next stage until we have secured the budget. And everybody knows that. And yet it seems to be coming up as a recurrent theme when we're looking at different projects. So please, if you've got any queries about the budget, speak to us. If you've got any queries about the passive house elements, speak to us. This council, as Councillor Williams has said, is committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2030. We can't do that unless we embrace projects like passive house. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, may I call a recorded vote by roll call for the end of this debate?
Do you have support for that? Councillor Hyman, you have a point of order.
Yes, just so that we're absolutely clear in what we're voting on. Did you?
I was just about to read the recommendation.
Yes, well, I'm asking, is it just 2.1, which we were told earlier, or have the others? Because I think we were told that the others were agreed by the executive. And if the others were agreed by the executive, could we please have clarification whether that means that the final bullet point I've referred to previously at 7.4 is a council decision is overridden by the executive or not?
Thank you very much. We've heard you.
Sorry, I haven't really explained what I'm saying before you, Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if that existing
What is your
one,
point of order, councillor Hyman?
well, that we don't know what we're voting on and whether that and what
I'm
the
about to read the
outcome would
recommendation.
be. Yes, but I'm asking for further clarification, please, if I may, before you read the recommendation. That obviously is important, as to whether the council decision made in
Thank you, councillor Hyman.
2021
I'm
is
just about to
overridden.
get some advice on your point of order, and that will be answered. One moment, you may sit down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, a point of order is when a councillor believes that something unlawful has taken place or something that's not in compliance with the Constitution. I haven't heard from councillor Hyman either of those aspects, so I don't believe that a valid point of order has been raised. But if it's helpful, Madam Mayor, the recommendation that members are being asked to vote on is on page 3 of your agenda under item 8. That says the executive recommends that council approves that a revised capital budget of £31,137,252 as shown in the financial viability assessment at exempt annex 1 be agreed and allocated to deliver a new build Cranley Leisure Centre. And that is the recommendation that's been moved, seconded and debated at council this evening. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. So we have a roll call vote now. Ben, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I shall call members in order, in alphabetical order. So please state whether you wish to vote for, vote against, or to abstain when your name is called. Councillor Austin.
Against.
Sorry. Councillor Barker Lomax.
Against.
Councillor Beeman.
For.
Councillor Busby.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Coburn.
Against.
Councillor Crowe.
For.
Councillor Davidson. Councillor Denis.
Against.
Councillor Deuce.
For.
Councillor Fairclough.
For.
Councillor Follows.
For.
Councillor Gale.
For.
Councillor Goodridge.
Against.
Councillor Hess.
Against.
Councillor Higgins.
For.
Councillor Hyman.
Against.
Councillor Keel.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
Against.
Councillor Law.
For.
Councillor Long. Councillor Martin.
Against.
Councillor McLean.
For.
Councillor Merriweather.
For.
Councillor Mirrlees.
For.
Councillor Morrison.
For.
Councillor Monroe.
For.
Councillor Murray. 4. Councillor Nicholson.
4.
Councillor Palmer.
4.
Councillor Kenreid.
4.
Councillor Ruth Reid.
4.
Councillor Raleigh.
Against.
Councillor Rivers, Paul Rivers, apologies.
4.
Madam Mayor.
4.
Councillor Rubini.
4.
Councillor Spence.
4.
Councillor Staunton.
Against.
Councillor Steiger.
4.
Councillor Sullivan.
Against.
Councillor Liz Townsend.
4.
Councillor Philip Townsend.
4.
Councillor Ward.
4.
And Councillor Weldon.
4.
Apologies.
do I get a vote?
Yes, apologies. Councillor Williams, please.
4.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have 32 votes for and 12 votes against with no abstentions. Oh. Ooh. It's not on it. Oh.
Councillor White.
Councillor White.
Would-
Councillor, 4. Thank you. Thank you. Therefore, it's 33 votes for and 12 against.
33 votes for and 12 against. That is carried. Thank you. So now we come to agenda item 9.9. Councillor Spence, I believe you're going to introduce and move the recommendation.
Indeed, thank you, Madam Mayor. The Audit and Risk Committee considered these financial regulations at our last meeting. These regulations set out the governance arrangements and their associated controls, so are very important. Members, you will have seen that most of the updates are straightforward, but there's one that we did have some discussion on, and that was the increase to the supplementary estimates limit. We heard from officers that that limit had not been changed for a long time. And although there were usually a few requests, mostly for small amounts, an uplift to 250,000 was needed to allow for the smooth and efficient running of the council. Given the potential sums involved, the committee did ask for some transparency and oversight on the use of this power. And we were given assurances, firstly, that the procedures set out in the documents were robust, that a record of these was included in the quarterly report to the executive, and the leader has further advised that any large amounts could be reported to the ONS committee. So therefore, Madam Mayor, I and the committee commend these regulations to members and propose that the council adopt such regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spence. I believe Councillor Reid, you're going to second.
Yes, happy to second, Madam Mayor.
Are there any speakers on this? Councillor Follows.
Merely to confirm on behalf of the executive, the arrangements agreed with the Audit and Risk Committee in regards to the reporting of those under Part D.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm slightly uncomfortable on the increase from 100,000 to 250,000. As is clear from the papers, it makes it clear that it's will increase the risk and reduce transparency. And I know the leader is always keen on transparency. And I just think that the increase, the amount of the increase in one go is too much, and that it ought to be a lesser sum say 200 or 175. I do feel that an increase in one go from 100 to 250,000 is a step too far.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Are there any other speakers?
Point of personal explanation, I think.
Councillor.
Councillor Goodridge is correct. I am keen on transparency, which is why I've agreed with the Audit Committee that any spend over the original 100,000 is to be communicated to both the Audit Committee and to the Executive in public, so that it is transparent for everybody to see. So thank you very much, Councillor Goodridge. I agree.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? No. So we move to the recommendations. Oh, Councillor Spence, you have a right to sum up. Thank you.
I'm happy to pass on that. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you indeed. So the recommendation is for council to approve this evening is that council adopt the updated financial regulations. Thank you. Yes, everybody did agree. Can we just agree that again? Yes, that is carried. Thank you. Agenda item. Do we have a point of order?
No, I didn't agree. I abstained. Obviously, my voice wasn't quite as loud as others in there.
Shall we call a vote? Okay. We will move to the vote, please. Councillor Rubini.
Apologies, Madam Mayor, I pressed the wrong button. I've now repressed the correct one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for your patience. Councillors, the vote is 33 votes for, 2 votes against, and 9 abstentions. Thank you. And it has taken into account.
Thank you very much. So that is carried. And we move to agenda item 10, the Licensing Act, and approval of the Statement of Licensing Policy. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move and recommend the new Licensing Act.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ward, you're seconding.
Pleased to second, Madam Mayor.
Are there any speakers? No. So the recommendation for council to approve this evening is that the Statement of Licensing Policy 2023 to 2028 be approved.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That is carried. Agenda item 11. Leader, please report on the quarterly report on urgent decisions.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. In accordance with Council Procedural Rule 15.3, I made one special urgency decision on the 21st of September 2023, which was to award a software contract for payroll and HR administration Councillor Peter Martin duly agreed in his role of chairman of overview and scrutiny resources that the decision was urgent for the following summary reasons. One, the existing software contract for payroll and HR administration expired on the 30th of September 2023. The unanticipated expiry of the preferred procurement framework agreement. 3, delays in the provision of information from the contractor. And 4, approval was required before the expiry of the contract and could not be reasonably deferred. For all those reasons, a decision was taken and therefore notify council as such. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Now we come to agenda item number 12. Motions. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much, Susan. We have one motion that has been submitted and the leader considered it convenient and conducive to, yeah, lovely word, to allow this to be dealt with this evening. The motion has been submitted by councillors Peter Martin, Michael Goodridge and Carol Coburn and is set out on your agenda. Councillor Martin, would you like to read the motion and introduce it, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for your conducivity, if there is such a word. The collaboration arrangements between Guildford and Waverley were conceived in haste nearly 3 years ago. They were first introduced at the tail end of a very full council in February 2021. The objective then was to have one shared officer resource working for 2 separate democratic councils. The Conservative group, Madam Mayor, in common with the Conservative group at Guildford, has consistently opposed collaboration or merger, voting against it at every opportunity, and particularly at 3 full councils in July and August of 2021 and April of 2022. Why is this? Well, firstly, the government's structure is flawed. The idea of a single administration responsible to 2 entirely separate councils and political entities is highly questionable. It is bicephalous. That means it has 2 heads. We have a curious 2-headed arrangement. No private business would organize itself in such a way. Dreadful even when the 2 bodies have similar political ideals, disastrous at some point in the future when that is not so. Secondly, the business case was never clearly laid out. The idea was that each senior management post would be merged and through each joint executive, with each joint executive being paid more, but a saving is generated, of course, because of the halving of the posts. As it stands now, some 16 positions are in this joint arrangement, notably the chief executive, his 3 direct reports and the 12 heads of service at the next level. The drawback here is that each authority only then has 16 halves of a senior executive working for it. Is a halving of the time that our management team spends on Waverley Borough Council good for Waverley? I don't think it is. This is not a criticism of our staff in any way. They are good, able and effective, but we are asking too much of them. The theory was that the bigger joint positions would be more attractive and would be easily filled. What have we actually found? We have worked our way through 2 Section 151 officers, 3 heads of planning, and we now look for a 2nd chief executive. We have an able interim Section 151 officer, but cannot find a permanent replacement. Across Waverley, we have significant resignations, large numbers of interim and agency staff and high staff turnover. And we heard earlier about the planning department with the very worst turnover in the country. The collaboration savings made are surely far less than planned, and the impact on service levels to members of the public and on staff morale is clear. What then of the quality of the relationship that we have with Guildford? Sadly, we find ourselves allied with a failing council. Guildford is in financial difficulty and has avoided a Section 114 notice for now. And then there are accounting and financial irregularities centered around the housing maintenance contract. The press asserts that this amounts to many millions of pounds. As the leader of this council has often said, a strong Guildford is good for Waverley. Quite clearly, a Guildford is not strong. If a strong Guildford is good for Waverley, then quite logically, a weak Guildford is surely bad for Waverley, and I believe it is. When the going gets tough in one council, the other is going to suffer. Inevitably, joint senior management time is drawn to the council where the problems are, not good for the other council. The collaboration agreement has a risk register, which is reviewed and updated every 6 months by the Joint Governance Committee. The committee was supposed to meet last week, but it actually didn't meet. The meeting would have looked at joint risk number 5. That says there is a risk that joint management resources will not be apportioned fairly. Management says this is happening right now and gives it a very high or a red rating. Not my assessment, that of the senior management team. Risk number 8 says there is a risk that officer capacity will be overstretched during the transition. Rating, red. Risk number 11 says there is a risk that one council's priorities will dominate for a period. Rating, red. Number 13 says there is a risk that savings beyond that of the JMT cannot be realized at one or both councils. Rating, red. There are more red, red, red ratings. So where are we? We have a two-headed governance structure, which I believe is not fit for purpose. We should terminate it. We have a position today with too many senior resignations and difficulty in senior management recruitment. Time to put a stop to this. We have a position today where we have allied ourselves with a failing council. It's time to call a halt. We have a process in train which seeks to go beyond collaboration. The vision statement talks of one team, one culture, stronger together, and looking for further collaboration. Really? Nearly 3 years into this unfortunate arrangement, I don't see that we are stronger together, and I don't want to be drawn into it yet further. I do not seek a merger by the back door. It's time to stop. My motion calls for a review with a clear intention to seek an orderly termination. The inter-authority agreement has termination clauses. Let's take a close look at where we are and seek an orderly termination of these unfortunate arrangements. Madam Mayor, I second.
Thank you very much. Councillor Goodridge, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'm pleased to second this motion. When the decision was taken by the majority on the council at the time to collaborate with Guildford, there was no risk assessment at all, which is somewhat surprising. Subsequently, the Joint Governance Committee, and prior to that, the Joint Inter-Authority Agreement Working Group worked up a risk assessment, and we spent many meetings sorting out the risk assessment. And obviously the intention of a risk assessment was to reduce red to amber and from amber to green. In other words, to reduce the risks that were happening. As Councillor Martin has said, the last meeting of the Joint Governance Committee was to take place on the 9th of October, and the agenda showed officers quite rightly were recommending that some of the ambers should now be not turned to green, but turned to red, i.e. the wrong way. And Councillor Martin has referred to some, but the ones that I want to highlight was the likelihood of the joint JMT resource would not be apportioned fairly, and this was raised from medium to very high. And also risk 13, the savings beyond the SMT not realized. Unfortunately, the meeting had to be deferred, and we don't know when the new meeting is to take place. The reason why it was deferred is the whole of the Guildford members, apart from the Conservative member, did not turn up and had not apologized. shows how important Guildford consider this. Also, our leader had tendered his apology, but at least he'd apologized. And the Guildford team were therefore in quorum, and so we all wasted a Friday morning. The fact that Guildford is in serious difficulties is affecting the ability to fill top vacancies on a permanent basis, such as the Section 151 officer, which is now costing us both authorities a fortune. And I think it could affect the appointment of a joint chief executive next year when we lose our current person. I think there's a high risk of not having long-term savings. There's a high risk that unhappy staff, and it is, in my opinion, from the various things that are happening, that it's becoming a merger rather than a collaboration. Understandably, senior joint team officers are spending a lot of time to sort out the Guildford problems to the detriment of Waverley and its residents. These high risks are coming to roost. There is mention in the papers that there will be they're proposing that there might be simultaneous executive meetings which are being considered. I have no idea what that means. Presumably both executive meet at the same time in their offices with the senior officers advising both executives at the same time. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but a further evidence of merger. And I therefore have pleasure in seconding this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. We have Councillor Follows first and then other speakers, please, but Councillor Follows.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, fellow members. I think this may rank as possibly the most irresponsible motion ever put before this council, and that really is saying something. I mean, local government is under an existential threat, and over at least the last decade in the UK, central government has persistently and systematically set about reducing funding to local government at every level. Now, all members, and indeed quite a few residents, will be aware of Section 114 of the Local Government Act. And this is a concept I think that was hardly common knowledge until the last few years, and even more so in the last few months. Now, although there are many declaring such a notice, and they're currently outliers, I think, with very clear reasons for their troubles, such as Woking or Birmingham, the systematic funding reductions across local government are now starting to impact even the most prudent of local authorities. And I would point to perhaps Conservative flagship council of Hampshire, which somehow is struggling. The impacts of those cuts to funding are hitting at every single level of local government, as repeatedly highlighted by the LGA, which just, of course, if anybody needs reminding, is also chaired by a Conservative. There are two phrases I've heard repeatedly since I was elected, and I've heard actually annually ever since: fair funding review and business rates reform. Two central government-led processes that every single year are meant to be coming right up until the point that they're not, and they've never happened. Now, last week, I asked the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the United Kingdom, the MP for right here, if any of those changes were coming, if any help was coming. I even asked for a number of things that most residents, and I think most anybody who's worked in any kind of company whatsoever, would expect to be things that we actually already have. Basics like a knowledge of a few years settlement in advance so that we can plan, rather than a mad flurry before Christmas each year. And yes, fellow members who are newly elected, sort of by this point of this council, sometimes our finance officers don't find out till December the 20th what the funding formula is going to be for the following year, because it takes the government that long to figure it out, and that's all they get, that 1 year. So my enduring respect as ever to our finance teams for having to figure that out. But suffice to say, it is very clear from the Chancellor that we must look to ourselves. There will be no help coming from this government, which takes me to the motion. The motion before you this evening is, in my opinion, bizarre. And I put that word first before the other epithets that I would attach to it, which are reckless and irresponsible. But members, I ask you to strike this motion down with prejudice, I think, for 4 reasons. First of all, it commits to a course of action at the same time as requesting a review to establish if that action is appropriate. It patently doesn't care about the outcome of that review or any evidence, and it's entirely making a decision completely independent of what that review might say. That is exactly what the wording has said, which you've just actually misrepresented in your own introduction, Councillor Martin, because the wording and the order of that decision is quite clear. It lays bare that ideological, politically motivated action rather than a rational one. Secondly, it neglects to recognise the review mechanisms that already exist to both of our respective scrutiny committee, already exist, despite the fact that you have yourself just articulated several of those core risks that any business or local authority might have a duty to highlight, and are articulated as part of the governance arrangements for the collaboration. Indeed, as ever, the proposers of this motion are chair and vice chair. My apologies, it's now Councillor Goodridge, but the Conservative front bench here leading this are the chairs of our respective scrutiny committees. And again, they neglect their own duties and remit to scrutinise. And that is before we get to the existing mechanisms that exist for governance within our own councils, hiring, and for the other joint aspects that are subject to regular review, as clearly outlined by the inter-authority agreement. Now, thirdly, in coming to a clear position independent of the facts, the motion ignores the clear benefits of collaboration. The opposition haven't remotely articulated where they would get the equivalent of all the revenue savings so far, and given no indications of how they would address the expanded budget gap that the abrogation of the collaboration of Guild, fact that no help is coming. There is also, I think, something to be said for retaining some of our financial independence and control and democratic destiny as long as possible in the face of continuously looming but ultimately ambiguous local government reorg plans. And finally, but probably most importantly, is the impact this motion would have on our staff here at Waverley. And the impact even discussing this is likely to have on well-being and morale. Members, I urge you tonight to show our staff who has their back and who doesn't. This motion manages to be ideological, political, irresponsible, reckless and heartless all in one. I urge you to vote it down.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Councillor Staunton.
Having been part of a business that merged with another organisation, I know firsthand how significantly employee turnover can be driven by and contribute to the failure of mergers. I think employee turnover at council seems to be particularly high at the moment, and as a result, I'd like to call a halt to the merger.
Point of personal explanation, Madam Mayor. This is not a merger, it is a collaboration, and I would ask that any use of the word merger be explained using the definition in the Oxford English Dictionary.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. We have a lot of speakers. Thank you. It's Merriweather, Clark, Austin. We'll take that. So Merriweather first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I hope it's a truth universally acknowledged that our opposition colleagues know perfectly well the immense financial pressures we face, like all our peers in local government as a result of the changes since 2010 in the way the government funds local authorities. When our opposition group were last in power themselves, and I use those words carefully, before COVID and with cost inflation at 2%, they were still so concerned, even then, by the structural deficit in our funding that they commissioned a budget strategy working group to identify measures that could be taken to resolve a projected budget deficit that would have risen to £4.9 million per year just through to this current year, 2023-24. That working group was tasked with a radical rethink of how this council services were delivered. Now, while in the event, it proposed some rather conventional and finite cost savings and income generation measures, it was deafeningly silent on the subject of local authority collaboration. And that was despite the mounting evidence from local authorities across the country and even the encouragement and support available from government that all clearly signposted that's collaboration is something that a responsible administration should have been considering. Since then, not only has this administration managed to balance our budgets, we've done so in the face of COVID and punitive, eye-watering inflation that's magnified the direct and indirect pressures on our resources many times over and will be with us for years after the fleeting support from the government and inflated treasury yields have gone. In order to balance our budgets, we've implemented measures that in some cases have exceeded those envisaged by the working group and even appear to be approaching the point of exhaustion. In the process, We've also avoided borrowing up to £100 million that our predecessors would have needed to implement their plans to invest in commercial property. And we've even fixed Waycourt East, the void that they left us behind. Also, despite the incredibly hard labour market, we've been able to react to some quite extraordinary demands on our services, as we did for the planning team, where we actually boosted funding in this year's budget, which I'm reminded was something the opposition group actually voted against. In fact, they've offered us nothing by way of alternative budget strategies or proposals. It's against that background that our measures have included the collaboration with Guildford, which in financial terms alone is still on target to deliver £700,000 annually in recurring savings by 2025-26. We started this work by commissioning an impartial expert report from the most appropriate source owned by HM Treasury and the LGA, no less. Since then, no decision's been made, no action's been taken without the evidence needed to back it up. None of this evidence has escaped through thorough scrutiny either, which of course is what this motion seeks to parody in such an extremely prejudicial way. Which does beg the question whether our opposition colleagues feel they could contribute more usefully to the real scrutiny process. I'm reminded, for example, that only last week, a briefing was specifically organised for the Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee to discuss our capital strategy, which was not attended by a single opposition group member, not even those who'd accepted the invitation. The good news for our residents, in the meantime, is that there is still expert scrutiny of this administration and constructive opposition to it, even if that's actually coming from members of the groups that are actually in the administration. I'll not be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Clark.
May I just explain that I'm standing up to improve my blood circulation. I'm not joining the opposition. Although I could be tempted. But seriously, in talking against this motion, I think it's appropriate to provide members with some context on what the opposition really think of the collaboration by highlighting some words from a statement made by the opposition on this very same subject last month. These words were included: chaos, falling apart, surprise and regret, unnecessary risk, and uncertainty. But when I look around the chamber this evening, I can't see any of the chaos referred to. Maybe one of us should have gone to Specsavers. Considering the impact of such words and this motion will have upon our staff, I have a few words of my own to add: reckless and inconsiderate. But at first, when I read the words used in the statement, such as chaos, falling apart, and uncertainty, I thought they might have been referring to their big brothers and sisters in central government. Because when talking about the collaboration, our colleagues in opposition continually refer to how many heads of finance we've had. But in the past 7 years, their big brothers and sisters in central government have gone through 5 prime ministers, 6 chancellors, 5 foreign secretaries, and 6 home secretaries. And not one of these ministers has given local authorities the funding settlement required to maintain our services now and in future years. And in fact, the opposite is true. However, in the same period, we've had 1 chief executive, and under his leadership, this council has become an example to the other 10 districts and boroughs across the county for its robustness and financial sustainability. Under his leadership, and as a result of the collaboration, the financial irregularities at Guildford have been uncovered and are now being addressed. This may not have happened without the collaboration. Madam Mayor, I and the rest of my colleagues in my group don't believe there's a place for politics in local government. And indeed, we have always maintained that councils should put people before politics. However, the rhetoric contained in the statement and including the motion from the opposition is a shining example of putting politics before people. The impact of their statement and this motion will have upon our staff and those at Guildford represent the unacceptable face of politics. I won't be going to Specsavers anytime soon, but I will be voting down this motion. Madam Mayor, on the subject of my eyesight, I've noted your concern. I've noticed that a funny thing about getting older is that your eyesight may start to fail, but your ability to see through people gets even stronger. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Councillor Clark. Now we have Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I fully support this logical and entirely sensible motion because I want to represent this chaotic merger for what it is on behalf of the people of Waverley. The 2021 decision to enter into this collaboration happened in just 20 days. The proposal was announced on the 16th of June and voted in at Council on the 6th of July. The Conservative Council Group at the time criticised the rush and deliberate lack of opportunity for proper scrutiny. Conservative councillors noted that having a schedule of risks is not the same as carrying out a full risk analysis. So we move forward to 2023. We're now tied to Guildford Council, which is in deep trouble, expending significant joint officer and employee resource to stave off a Section 114 bankruptcy notice, deal with millions lost and allegations of fraud. The council will have no joint CEO, are on their third Section 151 officer, and in the last 2 years experienced the loss of many key Waverley staff members. Waverley and Guildford now have both got the dubious honour of being two of the worst performing planning departments in the country. The inter-authority agreement states that both authorities should have equal status and that both authorities will retain clear accountability to councillors and residents of each authority. Well, we now appear to be at the very margins of complying with this legal agreement. I can demonstrate this by just reading the current joint governance risk register. Councillor Martin's illustrated, and so has Councillor Goodridge, many of these risks are heading south. So I won't go through everyone, you'll be relieved to hear, but maybe focus on risk 13. Risk that expected savings cannot be realised. High. Current impact, critical. Residual impact of this, devastating. Nowhere can I find a proper financial analysis of both benefit and real, direct and indirect, costs to the Waverley taxpayer of this merger. We hear a lot about some cost savings from merging certain roles, but that is pointless if, because of this, Waverley doesn't actually deliver the services within its remit, or we can't find or retain staff who want to work here. I want a council where, employees' time is 100% allocated to what I'm paying for, not firefighting for the council down the road. Let's be honest about what's happening here. We've got merged officer teams, merged service heads. Now we have merged staffing arrangements. All of this will happen soon from the planned merged offices, with future merged executive meetings now on the table, all disseminated via the planned merged communications strategy. So I ask, how long is it before we merge, or to use the Lib Dem nonsense wording, co-locate, all the councillors in one room at one time? I repeat, this is a merger by the back door. Guildford Councillor Bill Bay last week, Conservative councillor last week, described how we're stuck with the expensive Hollywood divorce. I think it started with the Hollywood marriage. Enticed by the bright lights of Guildford, the Waverley leader married in haste for political reasons. We are wedded to a Lib Dem-led, chaotic mess, destined for rehab. I believe it's responsible and right we undertake an impartial and comprehensive review and explore our exit strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. That's obviously a good story. As Jane Austen would write. Councillor Keel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Illogical, scaremongering, and out of ideas. These are the three themes that make up this motion. Illogical, as it seeks to both simultaneously review and determine to end the collaboration. Scaremongering, without any relevant facts or figures or arguments, the text of this motion proposes summarily ending what is to date an arrangement around a shared management structure, giving staff cause to worry for their jobs, giving staff a sense that all must not be right with the collaboration. What impact might this have on morale, on retention, and on recruiting new staff? Out of ideas, the opposition has put forward this motion with no alternatives, no answers, no suggestions, and even no real critique of the status quo. And doing nothing is simply not an option. I consider the language that has been used around this motion, and for many of the communications we have heard and read from the opposition on this matter, to be quite hysterical at times. Much has been said of the joint governance meeting not being quorate recently. This was, of course, inconvenient to members, and my time was also not best used that morning. But from time to time, this kind of thing happens. As one of the leads for governance and a member of that committee, I have asked officers to ensure that members are reminded of the importance of apologies and making substitutions. A single meeting not going ahead hardly signals a lack of interest from our colleagues in Guildford on the collaboration. Last week, we heard a similar motion to this at Guildford Borough Council, which was roundly dismissed and voted down. Commitment is therefore routinely demonstrated. This is not a merger. To date, we have a shared management team, and more recently, we have agreed to consider sharing staff on a temporary arrangement. We certainly have a shared vision to do more where it is in the best interests of both authorities. The councils will continue to be accountable to their own residents and retain separate democratic and legal entities. To me, this is not revolutionary. Indeed, not only has our shared management team saved us money as an authority, but it has also enabled sharing of expertise across the two councils. It has saved us time and effort. We've been able to engage in joint working, such as responding to government consultations together, reducing duplication at external meetings, working on shared templates for decision-making and governance, joint administrating of application schemes. This is not an exhaustive list, but simply indicates all of the other benefits that we can gain from working in a more harmonised way. As it has been discussed in other items this evening, the climate emergency is one that this administration is taking very seriously, and by working with another authority that also has declared a climate emergency and shares our target to be carbon neutral by 2030, we can seek to do more together than we could ever achieve on our own. Central government, after having years to find a solution to local government finance, has not and will not be coming to the rescue. We simply have no reliable, sustainable funding, and we therefore think more creatively to balance our budgets. Working with another authority can allow us to achieve the economies of scale that we cannot achieve alone and opens the door to opportunities. Collaboration is the only game in town. We need to control our own destiny, or it will be controlled for us. Seeking to undo the only tool we have in our arsenal to work together, make efficiencies, and deliver the services that our residents expect and deserve is not the answer. We have a positive working relationship with our colleagues at Guildford. We are due to meet on an informal executive basis again very soon. I would not wish to claim that we, as the administration, have the monopoly on ideas of how we can make savings and deliver services. And I do believe that we all want what is best for our residents, so would welcome constructive input from the opposition. The administration remain committed to our collaborative efforts and have a vision of working together to achieve more, to help deliver a positive future for all of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keel. There are still several speakers. The next three are Councillor Hyman, Councillor Juice, and Councillor Coburn. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. Yes, a little bit disappointed to read this because I think if you look at what's actually requested, it says that the request is for within 90 days a full review of the cost, benefits and disadvantage of the arrangements to be undertaken by officers, together with a full review of the cost, benefits and disadvantages. And we know what the outcome of that would be if we ask officers to do that. So and unless the world collapsed in between now and 90 days time, we're going to get absolutely nowhere by going through with this. I do think it's negative. The idea that we are going to have a review, as the leader has already pointed out, to seek an orderly termination of those arrangements before actually having the review is cart before the horse, and we obviously wouldn't wish to do that. I think if you were to remove, if Councillor Martin were to remove the requirements, the wording about termination, an intention to seek orderly termination, and were to remove the bit about the reasonable timetable for that termination, I'd fully support it. I think it's only prudent to seek review of the arrangements that we've got, and I'd fully support it in that respect. But I don't imagine that that's going to come forward. I'm not going to put forward such an amendment to the motion. I don't think it's my position to do so. So I think I'm going to be voting against this, but I would say that I certainly do agree that Councillor Martin and others have made extremely valid points. Equally valid points have been made in response, that must be said. So I think it certainly doesn't make sense to agree to seek termination without review first, so I have to vote against it in that respect, just from common sense, even though I support really the idea of a review. So I think what we perhaps ought to do is for members to work together in an informal group to get answers from the officers. We don't want the review to be undertaken by officers. It's got to be undertaken by us. We know what the officers will say, and that perhaps bring a different recommendation to Christmas Council if it is an appropriate thing to do, having found a few more facts. But I don't have the information to vote in favour of this, and it would be a big thing to do that. I'm awfully sorry I can't support it. I think it was a mistake to bring it forward in this form, but I don't see that there's an awful lot more to be said on this. It was a mistake, I think, to go for termination within it. It's a good idea otherwise, and we need the review first. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Deuce.
Thank you. I'm afraid I disagree with Councillor Hyman in terms of valid points being put forward by the opposition. I think there's been a general lack of wider context considered. Linking back to what has been mentioned in terms of central government funding, the revenue support grant has gone down from £6 million a year that we received in 2009 to 10 to nothing from 2017 to 18. Instead, we're operating on about 3.75 million, which is through the council tax grant freeze and the new homes bonus. And I'd be interested to hear how we're expected to fund services that we provide, given that we're operating on much less than we were in 2009 to 10, given the increases in inflation, not to mention the economic fallout from the impact of Brexit, the COVID-19 pandemic, the fallout from Truss's economic policies, which have been dire. Yes, as has been mentioned, what alternatives are you proposing? What services are we not delivering, Councillor Austin? I'd be interested to hear your answer to that. What detriment? We have to consider that this is not an isolated, out of context situation. I'd also like to remind Councillor Austin that we are not two of the worst performing planning departments. There is a difference between planning recruitment levels, which have already been explained in terms of the wider context, and what was mentioned by Councillor Townsend at the beginning of how much we have improved in terms of our planning department. Equally, the fire service was mentioned, again, chronic underfunding. So there has to be creative decision-making here. That's been put forward, as well as the positive collaboration points that were made by Councillor Keele. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deuce. We have Councillor Coburn, and then I'll say the next three speakers. Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. As ever, we're miles off the point. Collaboration, if you look it up in the dictionary, somebody mentioned the dictionary, the two main definitions are two separate entities working together. That's collaboration. And the second one is actually working with the enemy, which is also collaboration. I'll just throw that in because you mentioned the dictionary. Those were the first two I found. I don't have any problems with collaboration, but I don't think what we have got at the moment is what I would mean as collaboration. Collaboration is two authorities working together, retaining their separate identity and combining certain services that could be easily combined. Comms, HR, that sort of thing, legal, all of those things. That's not what we've got here. It's not what we've got here at all. And that's why I opposed it from the beginning. And I'll carry on opposing it. Councillor Martin talked about something being bicephalous. It's not how I see this. I see this as the way a child would draw its parent. You get this enormous head, everything out of proportion because nobody's told them. And then suddenly they remember, oh, goodness me, there's arms, legs, and they put the arms and legs very small at the bottom. And that's exactly what we've got here. We've got this enormous shared merged, and you have to use the word merger. I'm sorry, the senior management team do not collaborate. They are merged. They work together, they are merged. And quite frankly, I'd rather have a total merger. At least we'd all know where we are with a total merger. But my real fear, and I've raised this in the Wilfred Noyce Centre and I've raised it everywhere, is staff. Every time we raise it, we're told we're the reason that the staff are leaving because we're raising it. No, we're not. We talk to the staff. They talk to us. Some of us have known them for years. We know when they're happy and when they're not happy. So don't please blame staff morale on the fact that we are raising the fact that the staff should come first in any arrangements. And I raised this in Wilfred Noyce. I said, what I really have a problem with is just sorting out the top when you're not bringing the staff with you. Like, was it Councillor Staunton? I've lived through two mergers, one personal, much smaller, 500-600 people involved, one through my husband, which was international, thousands of people. And the only way that works is to get the staff engaged at the beginning. And when I say the staff, I mean all the staff. We've got some splendid officers here, and it breaks my heart to see some of them working, if you like, not at full pace, and certainly not with the smile they used to have. And if you think I'm just being anecdotal, just actually talk to them, because they talk to me. What really upsets me about this is I spoke to one officer, and I said it must be very difficult for the senior team working on two separate sites, trying to go over the two authorities. And this officer turned to me and said, they're not working for two authorities, Carol. And they didn't mean they're not working for Guildford. They meant Waverley is being neglected at the moment because of the situation in Guildford. That does not serve our residents. I'm sorry. Now, if we had a collaboration with Guildford that served our residents, I wouldn't have a problem with it. And that actually valued our junior officers, really valued them. I know COVID, breakdown, all these things has also been an issue, but you walk in here, it's like the Marie Celeste if you come in here during the week. Never was like that in the past. I know that's home working and we've got all sorts of reasons, but it is partly the fact that we have this rather separate, if you like, merged top and an awful lot of unmerged bottom that really has no idea where it's going. So I'm sorry, I would support collaboration, I'd support merger. But this hybrid is doing no favours to anybody. Thank you.
Thank you. The next three speakers are Councillor Ward, Councillor Rubini and Councillor Mirilees. Councillor Ward, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't often speak from the platform, but there are particular reasons why I'm going to do so today. For newer councillors, this collaboration is not a recent idea. It was initiated when I was leader of this council, not long after I formed this cross-party administration. So it's been around for a long time. There's a lot of thought gone into it, a lot of consideration, and we think it is the way to go forward. There have been many reasons given. Funding is a big one, but the objects remain the same as they were when we started. The objects are to save money. Another object is to defend against mega unitary ideas that are flowing in the higher up circles of this county. And one of the other things, which I think is quite vital, is to form a basis or a nucleus of what might become a smaller unitary council where we choose our own partners rather than getting things foisted on us. Now, what is wrong with that? Collaboration works elsewhere in the world, in the county, and in the country. We've even had coalition governments. When Surrey attempted to become a mega unitary, this council, under my leadership, was in the forefront of a cross-council collaboration of Conservative, Liberal Democratic, resident and independent-led councils, successfully opposing this power grab. Collaboration works. I find it interesting that the same motion has gone to both councils, because one might feel that something that was beneficial for one council would possibly be detrimental to the other. So here we have a number of speakers talking about Guildford as a failed or failing council and asking why we're getting together with them. But I wonder why their compatriots on the other side in Guildford said, oh, we don't want this merger either. If they're failing and we're the white knight, why weren't they jumping for joy and welcoming Waverley through the doors? I just find it totally confusing. This motion has no evidence. It asks to study benefits and then presumes the outcome, whatever the results of the benefits, with wording that is so crudely drafted has become almost contradictory. It's basically saying, we don't care what the evidence is. We want to scrap this. We want to tear it up. I think this is terrible. I'm not going to go on for much longer, but let me just finish with, I just cannot resist a lovely alliteration that is rather tempting. I have to marvel at the irony of a cross-council Conservative collaboration opposing cross-council collaboration. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I am standing. I'm not joining the opposition, but ever since I've been in this chamber, I've always stood in respect of the Mayor. I will continue to do so. Madam Mayor, I really cannot agree with this motion. Due to the lack of funding for local authorities from the Conservative government and their large inflation rate, most authorities are struggling. Our aims at both Guildford and Waverley is to reduce costs and, of course, share officers where appropriate. We are not becoming a part of Guildford. We are going to remain an independent authority. We already have safeguards in place to terminate this agreement should circumstances change. In this way, we believe we are acting prudently to safeguard our community that actually rely on us. We are not alone in the sharing of costs. Surrey Police have a very similar model with Sussex Police. There are other local authorities who are already reducing costs by sharing with neighbours and others planning to do so. To me, this motion just shows the lack of understanding that the Conservatives have for those struggling in the community. I will support the present arrangement and vote against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rubini. Councillor Mirrlees.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm a bit husky tonight. I just thought I'd let you know. I haven't, it's not the drugs. Anyway, although it is primarily the opposition's financial concerns that have brought this to council, despite basic savings so far of £859,000 through the JMT and business support team structure, what is most disturbing to me about their desire to bring about the collapse of the collaboration is their disregard for the members of staff on either side. Are they aware that if this action were to go through, it would mean that both councils separately would have to decide on a new structure, and whilst that structure was being decided, costing more time and money, the staff would be put on the redundancy register and their jobs re-advertised, for which they would have to reapply or take redundancy. Now, if I were one of them, I might think to myself, do you know what? I've had enough of all these political shenanigans. I'm feeling insecure. I'm done. I've had enough. I don't know whether my job is safe here. And that is what this is causing. The effect on our staff could be catastrophic for the council and ultimately the electorate we seek to serve. Coming at a time against a backdrop of chaos in this country, it is truly irresponsible. The pandemic has left us not only worse off financially, but in the way people feel, think, and behave. We now have kids who've not returned to school and by all counts aren't receiving any education. We have people with serious mental issues, people who have no longer wish to work, people stealing from our shops, employing violence on a daily basis. And added to this, the horrors of war on the international stage, creating more fear and worry. We do not need any more chaos than we have already, and plunging us back into uncertain territory at great cost would do just that. Our councils need to stand firm, get ourselves sorted out, help one another find the best solutions to managing our boroughs and progress the projects that we have committed to for our communities. Reversing everything just to stand still and hope for the best is not the answer. The collaboration between Guildford and Waverley is fundamentally a positive and necessary one. To echo Councillor Ward, let us not forget the threat of unitary authority still being considered, albeit covertly. Joining forces with our neighbours give us the muscle to decide on our own future, rather than have it determined by others who do not have the same care or interest. And like all collaborations, there are always problems to overcome. But I suggest it's completely unrealistic to suppose that all creases would have been ironed out in such a short time, given the current economic situation. And there's something I just sort of flag up, and it's a bit left field, but I thought I would anyway. If and when the large swathe of countryside owned by the University of Surrey running alongside the Hog's Back comes up for development, it will impact on both Guildford and Waverley. So it's important we both have a seat at the table. Separately, our capacity to compromise and assist one another would be much less effective. But as collaborative neighbours, we should have a stronger voice. These future projects need to be considered because they aren't a pipe dream with the increasing need for housing, and they are coming our way. I therefore urge people to see the long-term benefits of staying within our partnership and also understanding the downside with the cost, not just financially, but to the well-being of our staff and councils. So please vote against this.
Thank you, Councillor Murleys. I haven't seen any more hands for a while. I have a list with 5 names on, so these may be the last, yes, these may be the last 5 speakers. The 5 speakers I have are Councillor Palmer, Councillor Murray, Councillor Higgins, Councillor Williams, Councillor Reid. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'd like to congratulate the opposition on finding a subject that excites widespread interest, judging by the forest of speakers eager to debate it. But I'm afraid the congratulations end there. First, as Councillor Follows and others have observed, the motion is self-contradictory. It attempts simultaneously to initiate a review of pros and cons while determining the desired outcome. I'm familiar with this approach to consultation from Mr. Sunak's national government, but it's a pity that our Waverley friends are intent on copying it. Second, colleagues will be aware that councils across Britain are facing financial challenges, so it is self-evident that we should seek to share facilities and senior officers with our neighbouring borough in Guildford, where this will save resources without damaging services. Now that this has been started, it would be perverse and counterproductive to uproot the plant so soon after it has been placed in the soil. Third, and more seriously, echoing what my colleague Councillor Merrily said, staff of our council and also staff of Guildford Borough Council need a period of stability. It is profoundly unhelpful to call the entire project into question. I intend to oppose the motion and urge my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. There are additional speakers to the list. Councillor Murray next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm deeply saddened by this motion. Others have spoken with greater authority on the benefits of the collaboration. But I feel it is just political posturing by the opposition group, which will only add worry and stress to the employees, like other councillors have stated. It's a time of great uncertainty for both councils. I asked the leader when he briefed us on the CEO's departure, what we can do as members during the transition period. His words were to be kind and understanding, as they are rightly concerned to lose such a good leader as Tom Horwood. This motion surely flies in the face of this. And I, for one, cannot support it for that reason. And I urge all my fellow councillors to do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Higgins, then Councillor Williams. Councillor Higgins.
When I was elected, I must admit, I wasn't sure what I would find at Waverley. I wondered whether I'd end up feeling frustrated and unable to resolve issues that residents raised with me. However, I shouldn't have worried, because every officer I've had contact with from Waverley and Guildford have been absolutely brilliant. They are dedicated, hardworking, and I've always felt that they will go that extra mile to help me and residents. So when this motion was presented, I thought, okay, I'll keep an open mind. Maybe this will be a serious debate looking at aspects like staff welfare, whether there's been an impact on officers and staff in relation to collaboration. However, I was wrong. Unfortunately, this is just a poor attempt to score political points. When I step into this chamber, I'm making decisions based on what is best for residents of Waverley. When making decisions on spending or savings, I treat every single pound as if it was my own. So it angers me when a motion like this is put forward and it's so badly thought out, with no proposal as to how we would replace hundreds of thousands of pounds a year we currently save but would lose by ending this collaboration. The reason why people don't engage, let alone get involved in politics, is because of what they see. You only have to switch on the TV to see that too many politicians think politics is a game. It isn't a game. It involves serious decisions that impact the lives of real people. The decisions we make are more important than ever as our residents navigate through a cost of living crisis. We don't have to be like the politics that we see on TV. We should be better than that. Collectively, we should raise the bar. We should lead the way and show that politics can be done differently. It can be done better. Now, some members may walk out of this chamber tonight and give themselves a pat on the back and think they've scored a political point. However, I can tell you now, there will be no pats on the backs from residents. We have wasted our time on this tonight. We should have been getting on and focusing on real issues that affect residents. In light of that, Madam Mayor, I'll be voting against this motion so we can move forward and focus on the real issues that matter to the people of Waverley.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. We have now, I think, 4 more speakers. Councillor Williams, Councillor Reid, Councillor Fairclough and Councillor Townsend. No, and 1 more. So Councillor Williams, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I beg to differ with Councillor Coburn. I actually quite liked Councillor Martin's description of senior officers as being bicephalous. That, however, was probably about all that I agreed with in Councillor Martin's contribution. And Councillor Martin and others who've spoken tonight might recollect our escape from the many-headed hydra of Surrey County Council. As Councillor Ward, I think, reminded us earlier on. So I kind of look back in the annals of history, not going back to classical times, but just going back a few years, And I see a headline in Surrey Live on the 29th of July, 2021, which says, in quotes, Surrey County Council was not misled over the unitary bid, says Boris Johnson. And we remember Boris Johnson, don't we? He was the Prime Minister before last, the one who lost his job because he was a stranger to the truth rather than being simply incompetent. Now, at that point, the leader of Surrey County Council, Tim Oliver, stated that the status quo was not an option. And that was his rationale for the ham-fisted attempt to destroy local representation that we currently enjoy through Waverley Borough Council. But he was right in respect of the fact that local government is now between a rock and a hard place because of the impact of a Conservative government cutting funding available to local government over and over and over again. So our efforts to maintain a viable and proactive Waverley Borough Council are not an attack on democracy, as opposition councillors seem to be suggesting, but actually quite the reverse. We have no choice in terms of the need for financial savings and the need to enable us to do stuff, to spend on behalf of our community, other than participate in the collaboration that we have fostered. But actually, there are other benefits. There are, other than the financial savings. There are the economies of scale, which have been referred to tonight, and there is collaboration. Collaboration, Councillor Coburn, in the true sense of the word. For example, Waverley Borough Council has declared a climate emergency and committed ourselves to a trajectory to net zero carbon by 2030. Guildford Borough Council has declared a climate emergency and committed itself to a trajectory to net zero carbon by 2030. We both recognise the challenge. I collaborate, I talk with, I work with my counterpart on Guildford Borough Council, Councillor George Potter, and that is the way forward. We are not talking about merger, we are talking about collaboration. We are talking about fiscal prudence, and we are about common sense and paving the way for a better future for the people of Waverley. And I would urge us to reject this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Ward and I go back almost 20 years on this council, and I have to tell him that he has tonight probably stolen my thunder, because everything I was going to say, he included in what he had to say. So as you asked at the beginning, Madam Mayor, I won't be repeating it. Suffice to say that I've heard no compelling evidence that we should support this motion. In fact, all of the speeches from those who do support it suggest to me a reckless act, just like Brexit, of self-harm. Thank you.
Thank you, very, very concise. Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As a council, we must always remember our primary responsibility, our residents, to ensure that they receive the services they need at a cost that is acceptable to them. And to do that, everyone in this chamber relies upon the efforts of our officers, which is why it is so important to recruit, recognise, reward and retain each of them. With that in mind, this is not the time to fight amongst ourselves. To do that will only breed uncertainty and concerns about areas like job security. It is, of course, the role of the opposition to ask questions, and I, for one, welcome that. For without questions, we cannot be sure we have the right answers. And having listened to the questions and considered the potential answers this evening, I believe that this council is pursuing the correct strategy. The joint management team has delivered real savings to both councils. These savings have been important this year and will be even more important in the future. Central government will not come to our rescue. It will be down to councils to think smart and work smarter. And this is where our collaboration with Guildford really comes into its own. There has been talk tonight of being stronger together. We are. Officers from both councils are seeing the benefits of working together. Yes, we are providing support to Guildford. However, our officers are being supported by the additional resource and expertise provided by Guildford Borough Councils in return. Working together to deliver the services that our residents require and rely upon. And indeed, setting an example to this chamber. This is not the time for confrontation. This is the time for collaboration, and I cannot support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Fairclough. Councillor Townsend and then Councillor Morrison. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Councillor Morrison actually had his hand up prior to me, so I'm happy for him to go first if you'd rather.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to keep this short and simple because there's been a lot of people speaking this evening. But going back many decades when I was still at school, one of the first economics lessons I had was about economies of scale. And that is something I've seen in my professional life. I remember back in 1993, we took two very financially impaired companies and put them together under the same management. That was 30 years ago. One of those companies is still solvent today. Collaboration works, and it's so important. And we've had some very, very good speakers this evening making the point. I have not heard anything this evening that makes me think that the collaboration between our two councils should not continue. Therefore, I will vote against the motion. Thank you.
Morrison, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I speak, I would like to point out an error that Councillor Martin made when he said he implied that the changes in the head of planning service were due to the collaboration. That is not the case. And thank you for pointing out, Councillor Drews, it's also not the case that we are the worst. We have the worst turnover in our planning service in the country. I just wanted to make that clear. What we do actually have is officers working hard against extreme challenges, and it is unfair and unhelpful to keep piling undue criticism on them. And I object, Councillor Coburn, to undermining confidence, bringing into this chamber conversations you have had with officers when those officers cannot speak in their defence. I can assure Councillor Coburn that I speak to officers several times a day, and I would never break that confidence and speak completely incorrectly on their behalf in this chamber. Just wanted to make that very clear. As has already been pointed out at length, the collaboration, apologies, as has already been pointed out at length, the opposition would recklessly and motivated solely by political aims cancel a collaboration which is working for this council and working for our residents. They would ignore the cost savings, which many have already pointed out. They have no suggestions how they would fund the hundreds of thousands of pounds each year. Where is their plan? As Councillor Merriweather said earlier, they have offered nothing. They would ignore the future benefits and opportunities of collaboration across areas like in my portfolio of economic development and planning. They would ignore the benefits of joint procurement, the benefits of shared expertise, and the benefits of economies of scale, as was mentioned by Councillor Morrison, because at the heart of this motion is the desire to tear down the positive actions of this administration at any cost, even at the cost of the security of our officers, and ultimately in building a financially secure future for this council, and more importantly, as pointed out by Councillor Higgins, for our residents. This is cheap political point scoring that members of the same party have already raised and has been rejected firmly in Guildford. It appears that the opposition, in fact, are ideologically opposed to collaboration. when they had the opportunity to assist this council and its residents in generating revenue through the cross-party Asset Investment Advisory Board, they simply refused to take up their seat, putting politics before people. They would rather diametrically oppose everything to shift the focus from the very real financial issues that local councils are facing and the damaging kicking down the road of the Fair Funding Review and the review of business rates. What is extremely disappointing is the attempt to create a future of uncertainty for our officers who have worked hard to implement these changes and who are now seeing the benefits of that work. It is an easy target, but cruel to cast stones here, as they are unable to take part in this public debate, which I'm sure lots of them will be watching this evening. We live in a country where attacks on our civil service by the ruling party are now commonplace. The derogatory term, the blob, has unfortunately found its way into the political lexicon of the party of the opposition. Other public sector workers like our doctors and nurses and our teachers feel undervalued, overworked and politicised. We will not allow that to seep into this council. What we will do is continue to work with our officers to seek solutions to the tough problems that we face head on and to consider further collaboration where appropriate, along with approximately actually 97% of other councils across the country who participate in at least one inter-council collaboration. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Councillor Martin, you have a right of reply.
Well, thank you very much indeed. A number of points that come to light here. Councillor Follows and others make great political ploy, playing politics perhaps, about the government and its lack of assistance and the reduction of central grants. I was first elected to this council and to Surrey County Council in a by-election in 2005. And I was part of the county council, and from 2006 to 2017, I was on the cabinet of that council. I was the deputy leader for many years. I served there as a member of the cabinet under a Labour government up until 2010. I served under a Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition government, and I served later under a Conservative government. And I have been part of these councils ever since then and seen all of the financial difficulties. I have to tell you that every single year since I was first elected in 2005, it's always been very difficult, and there's always been a reduction in grants from central government by whatever government and by whatever flavour of government there is. So to heap the blame on the Conservative government is perfectly ridiculous in my view. Councillor Higgins mentions that he wants us to guard every pound as if it were our own. I agree with that, which is why I'm very unhappy with some of the overspending by this administration on things like acquisition of 69 High Street, Godalming, where they grossly overpaid for the building and then compounded the error by wanting to spend even more on refit and refurbishment, which gives us a very poor return. I see, for instance, in the retrofit of 7 houses in Oxford Ridge, where the lowest option was not taken, and we are spending far more than we should be on that. I see other places where we have grossly overspent, and indeed I come to tonight's debate on Cranley Leisure Centre, where I fear we are again going to spend more than we should. I will take no lessons in terms of pursuing value for money, because those are examples where value for money has been forgotten. If I move on, Madam Mayor, Councillor Clark talks about there's no place for politics in local government. Well, goodness me, what are we here for? We are all part of a political machine. That's what we do. Playing politics is the derogatory term which people heap upon an opposition when they are doing their job. I'm sorry, that's simply wrong. And I think placing me as the unacceptable face of politics is to invert the truth. We got on to, with Councillor Keele, Councillor Mary-Lees, the impact on morale and staff. And we talked about, or I talked about the the high resignation rate that we have and the high turnover, and what I perceive as a lack of morale amongst our staff now that wasn't true in the past. So to tell me that I'm causing these uncertainties is to simply invert the truth. It is this administration which has brought this upon us, with bringing us together in an unfortunate collaboration nigh on a merger, which is not yielding the results that it should. And hence my motion tonight, which says we need to end this arrangement. Councillor Douce mentioned planning. Talked about it not being the worst, but I would remind him that the Secretary of State for levelling up and housing was nearly ready to put us into special measures. So I think that was an example of this administration not doing a very good job. Councillor Mirides mentioned unitary councils. Actually, I'm quite a fan of unitary councils. This is not a conservative position from this group. This is me speaking personally. I would go with unitary councils, whether it's 1, 2, 3 or 4 or whatever it is of course the difficulty that we all have in terms of determining the rightness of that. But when you have to spend 10 minutes on the doorstep explaining local government to a resident and their eyes glaze over, a unitary council, in my view, would fix that. And I think that would be the right thing to do. Councillor Fairclough talked about the primary responsibility here for us is to our residents at a reasonable cost. I 100% agree with you. And that is why I am putting forward the motion that I have tonight. Councillor Townsend talked about recklessly cancelling collaboration. We're losing benefits, for instance, from joint procurement. Well, I'd be quite interested in some collaboration on joint procurement, for instance, with the waste contract. Why have we got 2 separate waste contracts when we could put the 2 together? We don't have to go with the arrangement that we have today with joint management in order to see that happen. It's simply not required. So let me come back to my motion. Yes, the intent is that we should review the collaboration arrangements with an intent for an orderly termination. That is what I want, and that is what the Conservative group wants. And indeed, we then said, well, and there are ways that we can do that. We marked out the risk assessment that management has put to the Joint Governance Committee and pointed out many of the difficulties that management are saying that we are having with this arrangement. We believe that it is time to call time on this collaboration or merger exercise, and I so move and ask members here to support. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, may I request a recorded vote by roll call?
Is that supported? Thank you. So we come to the vote on the motion. Would you like me to read the motion? Yes. The motion is, this council resolves to review the collaboration arrangements with Guildford Borough Council with an intention to seek an orderly termination of those arrangements. Council requests that within 90 days, a full review of the costs, the benefits and disadvantages of these arrangements to date be undertaken by officers together with a full review of the costs, benefits and disadvantages of and a reasonable timetable for that termination. That is the motion. So we are having a roll call vote. Thank you, Ben.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, when I call your name, please state whether you wish to vote for, to vote against, or to abstain. Councillor Austin.
For.
Councillor Barker Lomax.
For.
Councillor Beeman.
Against.
Councillor Busby.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Coburn.
For.
Councillor Crowe.
Against.
Councillor Denis.
For.
Councillor Duce.
Against.
Councillor Fairclough.
Against.
Councillor Follows.
Against.
Councillor Gale.
Against.
Councillor Goodridge. For. Councillor Hess. Councillor Higgins.
Against.
Councillor Hyman.
Against.
Councillor Keel.
Against.
Councillor Lawton.
Against.
Councillor Law.
Against.
Councillor Long.
Against.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor McLean.
Against.
Councillor Merriweather.
Against.
Councillor Mirrlees.
Against.
Councillor Morrison.
Against.
Councillor Murray.
Against.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Palmer.
Against.
Councillor Ken Reid.
Against.
Councillor Ruth Reid.
Against.
Councillor Raleen.
For.
Councillor Paul Rivers.
Against.
Madam Mayor.
Against.
Councillor Rubini.
Against.
Councillor Spence.
Against.
Councillor Staunton.
For. For.
Thank you. Councillor Steiger.
Against.
Councillor Sullivan.
For.
Councillor Liz Townsend.
Against.
Councillor Philip Townsend.
Against.
Councillor Ward.
Against.
Councillor Weldon.
Against.
Councillor White.
Against.
Councillor Williams.
Against.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are 9 votes in favour and 35 votes against.
Thank you, Ben. So council, the motion is not carried. And we move on to agenda item 13. Do we want to call them in? Yes. Would who's at the back? Councillor Gale, would you be so kind as to call our officers back for us? Thank you. Carry on. Yes. Right, yeah. Councillors, we haven't ended the meeting. Thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back, Tom. Welcome back, Susan. Welcome back. We now reach agenda item 13, the minutes of the executive. And we have the minutes of the executive meetings held on the 1st of August 2023 and the 5th of September 2023 to be received and noted. Is that agreed? Thank you. We have one question that has been given notice on executive minute 4323 of the 5th of September. Councillor Austin, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The resolutions of the minutes are unclear about the shared staffing arrangements. Please could the leader or an appropriate member confirm what you have actually agreed to? 1, for a temporary delegation of the shared staffing arrangements of an up to unlimited number of staff. If so, what is the temporary time frame for that temporary delegation? Or 2, for this delegated authority to be permanent for an up to unlimited number of individual staff members to be shared for a designated time period. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Councillor Keel will respond on my behalf, if that's all right.
Councillor Keel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Austin, for your question on the minutes 4323 from the executive meeting on the 5th of September 2023. To provide some clarity, the delegation is not intended to be temporary. However, delegations can be amended in future if necessary. It is a permanent delegation to the head of paid service to consider sharing staff with Guildford Borough Council on a temporary arrangement, which may include temporary secondments. There is no limit to the number of such arrangements that the head of paid service may authorise. Where approved by the head of paid service, arrangements will be temporary. It is likely that the head of paid service will keep such arrangements under regular review and that they would be for a maximum of 2 years to prevent employment rights being gained. It is anticipated that both councils may have made more permanent decisions about the sharing of staff before such temporary arrangements expire. The purpose of the decision is to enable opportunities to be realised where they arise, whilst both councils consider further options around collaboration and more permanent decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keel. Councillor Goodridge, you gave notice that you might want to make a statement.
In view of the question and answers that we've already had, I was going to comment on the same thing, but I won't now.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure everybody's very pleased about that, because I can now advise you all that as there are no further matters to be considered, this meeting is closed at 21:21.